I was killing fish in the back kitchen of a state-run restaurant when a group of officers burst in. I was so scared I raised my hands, still holding the bloody kitchen knife. Asked them if killing fish was against the law. They told me to put down my weapon, so I did. They asked if I was Su Miaomiao, the adopted daughter of Su the butcher. I said yes. My adoptive father died 3 years ago, so I had no idea what this was about. Then came the news. Good news. I'm actually the lost daughter of a military commander's family, the Hua family. Bad news. The whole Hua family is about to be sent to the countryside for reform. What kind of rotten luck is this? Before I could even process everything, a girl started yelling. Her name was Hua Lingxiu. She's the one who was swapped with me at birth. She grew up in my place, living the good life with my real family. Now she was trying to push me into taking her spot, so she wouldn't have to be sent away with the Huas. She even led the officers to search the Hua family's home just to save herself. My eldest brother, Hua Wenba, scolded her, but she didn't care. She said the Huas meant nothing to her. My family looked heartbroken. They had raised her like a princess, and the moment trouble came, she turned her back on them. I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. She noticed and sneered at me, saying I'd be starving once I got sent to the countryside. She looked down on me because of how I was dressed, apron stained with fish blood, hair tied up with a chopstick, looking rough. But I didn't care. I decided to settle things right then. She had just declared she had no connection to the Hua family and that everything they gave her was meant for their real daughter, not for her personally. So I told her, fine, then take off the gold earrings, the gold necklace, the watch, the leather shoes, and the fancy dress. Because all of those things were bought by my parents and my brothers for me. She was speechless. Her face turned red and white. Those things were expensive, worth hundreds in this era, and there was no way she earned them herself. I reminded her calmly, if she truly has no ties to the Hua family, then keeping their gifts would mean she has financial dealings with reform targets. Did she really want that on her record? She had nothing to say to that. Hua Lingxiu's face went pale when I pointed out that keeping the Hua family's gifts could get her in trouble. She had no choice. She ripped off the gold earrings, gold necklace, watch, and everything else and threw them at me, saying she didn't want the Hua family's dirty things anyway. I weighed the gold pieces in my hand. Not bad, pretty heavy. I told her to take off the shoes too. She looked like she wanted to kill me, but she did it. Then I looked at her dress. She finally snapped and yelled, "Do you want me to leave here naked?" I told her she could keep the dress, but she had to pay for it. I figured a dress like that cost at least 15 yuan at the department store, so I told her 10 yuan would do. I was being generous, really. She was shaking with anger, but before she could ask Officer Liu for help, I made my move. I handed the gold earrings and necklace to Officer Liu as a thank you gift for finding my family and told him to take his men to eat at the state restaurant on my tab. His eyes lit up right away. I could tell he'd been planning to take the jewelry from me anyway, using some excuse about confiscating goods. At least this way I got something out of it, his goodwill. But then he looked at the watch in my hand. His appetite was bigger than I thought. I cursed him in my heart, but smiled on the outside and handed over the watch too. Now Liu was happy. He turned to Hua Lingxiu and asked her to choose, pay up or strip. She had no backup clothes, so she dug out 10 yuan from her little bag and handed it to me, looking like she was cutting off her own flesh. She was too slow about it, so I snatched the money from her hand. Officer Liu glanced at my 10 yuan, but I quickly tucked it away and smiled at him, reminding him the restaurant would close soon. He let it go. After all, the 3 pieces of jewelry I gave him were worth nearly 200 yuan, almost a whole year of his salary. He could afford to let me keep 10 measly yuan. He told us to pack up tonight. He'd take us to the train station in the morning. Hua Lingxiu left with them, but not before spitting out one last curse at me. You only have one good night left. Where you're going is hell. Once they were gone, it was just me and this family I'd never met before. I heard quiet sobbing. I turned around and looked at them properly for the first time. They were all staring at me, curious, guilty, and most of all, heartbroken for me. That softened me up a little. I'd been worried they might be upset about how I handled Hua Lingxiu, but they seemed to understand. Good. If they hadn't, I would have kept my distance even after being sent to the countryside with them. My birth mother, Tang Chunlon, asked me my name. I told her Su Miaomiao. She said it was a nice name. I explained that my adoptive father picked it out after flipping through several books. He wanted me to grow strong like a seedling in the field. Then she started crying harder, saying she was sorry for losing me all those years, and sorry that I finally came home only to be dragged into their punishment. She was a delicate, gentle-looking woman, a classic Southern beauty, and something about seeing her cry made my heart go soft. Must be the blood connection. I awkwardly patted her shoulder and said, "Well, I'm being sent away, but I also found my family. You win some, you lose some." That just made her cry even more. I had no idea what to do. I can kill a fish, butcher a chicken, and wouldn't even blink at worse, but comforting people? That's something I've never learned. My birth father, stepped in and gently pulled my mother into his arms to calm her down. Watching them, I felt something stir inside me. The Hor family seemed like good people. How did they end up being sent away for reform? I looked around the room. There were nearly 30 people. The Hua family was huge. My eldest brother, Hua Wenba, explained everything. My father had 2 older brothers and 1 younger sister. First uncle's family had 8 people, second uncle's had 7, our family had 6, and my aunt's family had 3. My aunt lived in another city, but got dragged into this mess too. I asked about our family specifically. Wenba told me I also had 2 more brothers, twins, who were out taking our grandfather to the hospital with our grandmother. He'd go pick them up later. The most important question: where were we being sent? Our family and first uncle's family were going to Mo City, but different districts. Second uncle's family was going to Nan City, and my aunt's family to Shi Mountain. Including our grandparents, our group would be 8 people. Wenba apologized that they couldn't give me a proper welcome. I told him I didn't mind. He asked me to keep an eye on our mother while he went to check on our grandfather. I agreed easily enough. So far the Hua family seemed decent. After things settled a bit, my parents introduced me to everyone. We had to get it done tonight since everyone would go their separate ways in the morning. Then something unexpected happened. First uncle pulled out a pocket watch he'd treasured for years and pressed it into my hands as a welcome gift. I tried to refuse, but he pretended to look hurt and said, "What, you think it's dirty, because I used it." I realized right away he was playing me on purpose. Before I could argue, first aunt took off her bracelet and gave it to me. Then second uncle gave me a pen. Then second aunt. Then my cousins. One after another. The Hua family had already had most of their valuables confiscated. What they gave me were the few precious things they'd secretly kept. They gave me everything because they felt guilty that I'd come home just in time to suffer with them. I stood there with my arms full of gifts, not knowing what to feel. I tried to give things back, but nobody would take them. Finally, my father stepped in and thanked everyone on my behalf, and then everyone went to pack for tomorrow. My mother brought me to the room Hua Lingxiu used to live in. It was all pink with a princess bed, a desk, and a big wardrobe. All empty now, but you could tell how much love the family had poured into that ungrateful girl. I sat at the desk, looked at myself in the mirror, and sighed. I never got a single day of the good life, but I sure wasn't going to miss out on the hard times. Mo City. I searched my memory for what I knew about it. It's basically like Heilongjiang in the real world, freezing cold and desolate. Yes, the real world. Because I'm not actually from here. I crossed over into this world. In my previous life, I was on a mission. I took a bullet to protect someone I was escorting. When I woke up, my soul was inside the body of a baby girl who had been abandoned in the snow and had already died. My adoptive father found me and raised me. I've been living in this world for 18 years now. This world is like China's 1970s, low production, poor economy. Most people can't eat or dress well, and society is unstable. But my adoptive father was a skilled butcher, so I never went hungry. He even left me his job when he passed away 3 years ago. In my past life, I lived in constant danger, always running from one mission to the next. This peaceful life here made me content. I had planned to just keep living quietly, but then the Hor family situation dragged me in. Mo City is harsh, barren, and bitterly cold. Life there would be rough, and I have high standards for my quality of life. I could run away on my own easily enough, but if I did, the Hor family would be punished even more for it. I looked at the pile of gifts from the Hor family stacked on the cabinet. My heart stirred a little. In my past life, I was alone. The organization recruited me and trained me at their base. I had no family, no real comrades. I only trusted myself. But when I arrived in this world as a newborn baby, I was helpless. Old Su the butcher raised me with his rough, calloused hands. That cold, hard heart of mine eventually softened because of him. I thought about running away, but that would mean giving up my identity. Su Miaomiao was the name that old man gave me. He didn't leave much behind in this world, but I was one of the things he did leave. Besides, I promised him I'd find a husband who'd marry into the family and carry on the Su name. I couldn't throw that away. I closed my eyes and focused my mind. A massive space appeared before me, my special ability from experiments in my previous life. It came with my soul when I crossed over. I can store things inside it, and time stands still in there. I checked my supplies. I had a decent stock built up over the years, a lot of it left by my adoptive father. Rice, flour, oil, clothes, fabric, jewelry. But it wasn't nearly enough. After being sent away, who knows when we'd come back? And there were elderly and young people in the group. I needed more. So I got moving. Officer Liu had left 2 guards at the front door, so the front was out. I went to the balcony, 2nd floor, soft grass below. Easy. I checked that no one could see me, gripped the railing, and jumped down like a cat. Then I sprinted to the wall, leaped up, grabbed the top, flipped over, and disappeared into the darkness. I headed to Tenli Alley in the capital, the biggest black market in the area. I wrapped my head in a scarf, leaving only my eyes showing. 2 big men guarded the entrance. I gave the code phrase, "Tonight the moon seems to be covered by clouds." One of them answered, "Tomorrow will be sunny." Then he asked if I was there to sell or buy. I said both, sell first, then buy. Inside, the alley was lined with little stalls selling everything: rice, flour, oil, meat, daily supplies. Private trading was illegal in this era. Everything was supposed to go through the government. But government supplies were limited, so the black market filled the gap. I found an empty stall and laid out all the gifts the Hor family had given me. I know they were tokens of love, but right now, supplies mattered more than sentiment. Besides, our luggage would be searched, going to the train station tomorrow, and again when we arrived. Nice things like these would just be confiscated. Better to turn them into something useful. I priced everything low since I needed to sell fast. Within half an hour, everything was gone, and I had several hundred yuan in my pocket. In future money, that's nothing, but when pork cost 0.80 yuan per pound and rice cost 0.20, it was a fortune. Combined with my nearly 1,000 yuan in savings, I had plenty of capital. The small vendors couldn't handle what I needed, so I went straight to the black market boss and told him my shopping list. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. I asked for a pen and paper and wrote it all down. 1,000 jin of rough rice, 500 jin of white rice, 500 jin of flour, 500 jin of pork, 500 jin of beef, 200 jin of lamb, 100 jin of brown sugar, 100 jin of eggs, 100 jin of assorted candy, 5 cases each of various seasonings, 20 cases each of milk and malted milk powder, and as many steamed buns, mantou, and flatbreads as he could get. Then I moved on to daily necessities. Mo City was freezing cold, so I needed winter clothes, padded coats, padded pants, hats, gloves, shoes, all of it. I filled a whole page and kept writing. The boss finally snapped out of his shock and stopped me. "Miss, I don't know if you're messing with me, but even if you're serious, I can't get all this." I frowned. "You can't." The black market boss sighed and told me that only the government could supply the kind of quantities I was asking for. I knew my list was already conservative. With so many mouths to feed in the Hor family, we needed plenty of grain, or life would be miserable. I asked him how much he could actually get. He studied me carefully, clearly trying to figure me out. I told him I needed everything before dawn. He thought the timeline was too tight, so I sweetened the deal. I'd spend about 2,000 yuan on supplies, and I'd give him 100 yuan on top as his fee. His eyes went wide. I pulled out 5 10 yuan bills and put them on the table as a deposit. He checked every single one, stuffed them in his pocket, and his whole attitude changed. For him, this was nearly half a year's income in one night. He agreed on the spot. I told him to deliver everything to an abandoned warehouse on Shinko Road. He knew the place, remote, no residents nearby, perfect for a deal. I reminded him, anything delivered before dawn, I'd take it all. After dawn, I wouldn't accept anything. And don't get caught. He assured me he'd been in this business long enough to know how to be careful. I headed to the warehouse to wait. I wasn't worried about him running off with my deposit. The difference between earning 50 yuan and earning 500 yuan, anyone with half a brain knows which to pick. About half an hour later, the first delivery arrived, 200 jin of white rice. I paid cash on the spot. The boss had actually sent this first batch as a test to see if I really had the money. When I paid without blinking, he relaxed. After that, the deliveries kept coming. 600 jin of flour, 500 jin of rough rice, 200 jin of pork. Cart after cart rolled into the warehouse. I paid for each load as it arrived, and the boss just stood there collecting money, grinning so wide his smile practically reached the back of his head. This went on until just before dawn. Finally, he told me he'd squeezed every source he had, even reached out to other black markets, but with the crackdowns being so strict, this was everything he could find. He looked pained because he could tell I still had money to spend, and he had nothing left to sell me. I told him not to worry and handed him the other 50 yuan, the rest of his fee. He was thrilled. He glanced at the warehouse, now packed nearly full, and offered to have his men help me move everything, free of charge. I declined and told him I'd already arranged people to pick it up. He took his crew and left, eager to go split the money with his boys. Once I confirmed there wasn't a single person within 100 meters, I absorbed everything into my space. All those supplies barely made a dent in the storage capacity. I wished I had more time to stock up, but dawn was breaking. If I didn't get back soon, the Hor family would notice I was gone. I slipped out of the warehouse, silently, and headed back. Oh, I did keep first uncle's pocket watch. I'd sold the rest of the gifts, but a watch is practical. I needed to tell time somehow. I snuck back to my room and had just finished a quick bath when I heard noise downstairs. I threw on clothes and rushed out. My mother was walking toward me. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She clearly hadn't slept. Wenba came up the stairs and told her Officer Liu had arrived. It was time. Just as I expected, Liu's men tore through everyone's luggage. Anything valuable they claimed was evidence related to the case, and took it for themselves. The Hor family knew they were stealing, but no one could do anything about it. They just clenched their fists and watched their carefully packed belongings get ransacked. The family had been worried about the gifts they'd given me, but when Liu's men opened my bundle, all they found were a few of Hua Lingxiu's leftover clothes. The family looked surprised, but quickly hid their reactions. I'd already taken care of everything last night. Once Liu was satisfied there was nothing left worth taking, he escorted us to the train station. He smiled and wished Grandpa a safe journey. Grandpa just gripped his cane tighter, turned away, and let the family help him onto the train. Our family and first uncle's family were on the same train. The others had different trains. Everyone said goodbye in the station hall with red eyes. I stood in the back, watching. This is exactly why I've always preferred being alone. Every person you get close to becomes someone you worry about. With worry comes hesitation. With hesitation, your blade slows down, and your chances of survival drop. In my past life, I died alone. In this life, I've been forced into all these attachments. While I was lost in thought, a strong voice boomed above my head. Little sister, don't worry. No matter where we are, we'll take care of you. I looked up and nearly punched 2 identical faces staring down at me, my twin brothers. The gentler one introduced himself as Hua Minxiu, my second brother. The louder one was Hua Xingyuan, my third brother, who thumped his chest and declared he'd protect me from now on. All 3 brothers had completely different personalities. The eldest was steady, the second was gentle, the third was lively. I could easily imagine how comfortable Huolingxiu's life must have been growing up with them. Wenbo thought I was overwhelmed and scolded the twins for being too much. But really, I was fine. He looked at me with so much guilt, his little sister who never enjoyed a single day of the family's good fortune, and yet here I was, not complaining, not cursing, just quietly going along with everything. I could tell all three brothers were silently vowing to protect me. We boarded the train, a slow, crowded green-skinned train. It would take 2 days and 1 night to reach Mo City, and we only had hard seats. The young people could manage, but it would be rough on our grandparents. Grandpa had been an undefeated general in his younger days, and he still carried that commanding presence. But when he looked at me, his expression softened. He said he was sorry I had to suffer alongside them. I'd heard so many apologies by now that "it's okay" came out automatically.
He was pleased with me.
Wenbo had told him how I'd put Huolingxiu in her place, and he approved. But thinking about Huolingxiu clearly pained him. She'd been the only granddaughter in a family full of boys, and he'd spoiled her the most. She repaid that love by stabbing them the deepest. The old man who'd spent a lifetime reading people had been fooled by someone in his own family. He closed his eyes to rest, and I let him be. The trip was miserable. Even I felt sore sitting on those hard seats for so long. This body hadn't been trained like my previous one. My adoptive father had spoiled me too. He never let me do hard labor while he was alive. I made a mental note to start physical training once we arrived. There was food for sale on the train, but it was expensive, and the family was broke. We ate the flatbreads we'd brought from home. The first day, they were tolerable. By the second day, they were so hard and dry I could barely chew them. I had to force each bite down with a big gulp of water. Felt like it was scraping my throat raw. I had plenty of good food in my space, but there was no way to take any out with everyone around. So I chewed the same stale flatbread as the rest of them. After 3 days of bumpy travel, we finally got off the train on the evening of the third day. Outside the station, I spotted a young man holding a sign with my father's name, Huojengwo, scrawled in crooked handwriting. He was dark-skinned, bony, and very thin. He confirmed he was from Shima village and hurried us along, saying we needed to leave immediately or we wouldn't make it back before dark. Then his eyes landed on me and his whole face turned red, like a ripe black plum. Wenbo noticed instantly and stepped in front of me to block his view. Back in the capital, nobody would have dared look at her family member that way, but out here in the countryside, my brother knew he'd have to be on guard. The young man's name was Shania. He loaded us onto a donkey cart and chatted the whole way, filling us in on the village situation. Shima village belonged to Anyang Brigade, which had 12 villages total. We'd arrived during the busiest part of autumn harvest. Actually good timing, because if we'd come later, there'd be no work points to earn and no grain for winter. But looking at how skinny Shania was, my father's brow kept getting tighter. If a young man in his prime looked like that, the village clearly couldn't even guarantee basic food. My father started worrying about the grandparents, my mother, who had never done manual labor in her life, and me. We arrived after dark. The village chief, Wang Hongjia, was waiting under an old tree, smoking a pipe. He seemed decent enough. He looked us over. 8 people, 2 elderly with no labor capacity, the rest young and strong. I could tell he was calculating how much our labor would help with the harvest. He led us to our new home. My mother nearly fainted when she saw it. A broken-down cow shed with a scrawny water buffalo inside, and next to it, 2 shabby shacks thrown together with random pieces of wood. Nothing else around. Just emptiness. The village chief explained that the proper housing, the educated youth quarters, was only for the young volunteers from the cities. We were reform targets, so by the rules, this was what we got. He promised to send people to fix the place up after the harvest and told us to make do for now. My mother wanted to protest, but my father squeezed her arm and thanked the chief politely. The chief seemed satisfied with that attitude. He mentioned that the last group of reform targets who'd made a fuss and tried to throw their weight around, well, the grass on their graves was already 2 meters tall. He wanted peace in his village. As long as we behaved, things would be fine. He said someone would bring us some grain tonight, and we'd start working first thing tomorrow morning. Then he left. Shania put down our bags and headed off too, though he couldn't resist one last look at me before he went. I couldn't really blame him. Apparently he'd never seen anyone who looked like me before. He thought the educated city girls at the youth quarters were pretty, but he told himself I was on a different level entirely. Too bad this fairy was a reformed target. He just hoped we wouldn't cause trouble like the last group, because he wanted to keep seeing me around. Said it would brighten his day. After the village chief and Shania left, it was just us. My father spoke first. He knew he had to hold the family together. Xinyuan tried to stay positive, saying maybe the inside wasn't so bad.
It was.
When we pushed open those rotting wooden doors, the last bit of hope died. The place was completely bare. No beds, no furniture, nothing. Just a pile of straw in the corner for sleeping. Even my father flinched. Everyone stood there looking like they'd fallen into hell, so I stepped forward. I dug through the straw, chased out the little creatures living in it, flattened it out, then found a blanket from the family's luggage and spread it on top. It would do for one night. I told my grandparents to sleep there. Grandpa snapped everyone else out of their days and told them to start sorting out the rest of the straw. My mother grabbed my hand, eyes going red again. She asked how I knew how to do all this, and so naturally, too. She was thinking about how hard my life must have been. I pulled my hand away, still not used to her closeness, and told her it wasn't exactly rocket science. Then, I went to check the other room. It was identical, bare walls, straw on the floor. Before I could start fixing it up, my 3 brothers beat me to it. I went to the window and looked outside. Pitch black, with a few faint lights in the distance. That was the village. It was quite far from us. Actually, that was better. A broken house can be fixed, but if we lived in the village, people would be watching us constantly. Wenba told me the bed was ready, and that I'd sleep in this room with our mother. I suggested our parents take this room instead, but my father refused and left with my brothers before I could argue. My mother led me to the straw bed. Her eyes were still red, but she was fighting hard not to cry in front of me. Back in the capital, even their dog had better living conditions than this. I could feel her guilt radiating off her. To stop her from crying, I lay down on the straw and closed my eyes. She thought I'd fallen asleep instantly from exhaustion, which only made her feel worse. She sat beside me, quietly wiping tears, then tiptoed out once she thought I was asleep. The moment she turned around, I opened my eyes. Sleep? With someone staring at me like that?
Impossible.
Outside, I heard everything. My hearing is extremely sharp. My father told her the village chief had sent over our food supplies, 20 jean of corn grits, 3 cabbages, and half a winter melon. That was it. My mother could barely process it. She was from the south, raised on fine white rice her whole life. Corn grits were animal feed as far as she knew. My father said they'd just cook porridge and stew some cabbage, enough to fill stomachs. But my mother worried about the grandparents' health, and about me, so thin, still growing. How could this be enough? My father promised to ask around the village tomorrow for more food. My mother kept crying about me, her most pitiful daughter, until Wenba reminded her to keep it down or she'd wake me up. That shut the tears off instantly. Wenba quietly noted that I seemed to be the only person who could calm our mother down. What none of them knew was that I'd heard every single word. Worried about me? They should worry about themselves first. I sighed silently and closed my eyes for real this time. A good night's sleep was the only thing that would prepare me for whatever came next. I slept through the night without a single dream. When I woke up, no one was beside me. I stepped outside and found my mother crouching on the ground in front of a makeshift stove, just a few broken bricks stacked together with a battered old pot on top. Inside it, corn porridge was bubbling away. She smiled when she saw me and told me breakfast would be ready soon. My grandparents were resting in their room, and my father had taken my 3 brothers to gather firewood. They came back shortly, each carrying a small bundle. All 4 of them looked exhausted. I don't know where they slept last night, but clearly it wasn't comfortable. My mother served 2 bowls first and had Wenba bring them to our grandparents. Then she handed me mine. I said, "Thank you," and she almost started crying again. Her own daughter was thanking her like a stranger. Huling Xiao, had never once said those words to her. I stood there holding my bowl, confused about what I'd done wrong this time. My father took over the ladle and divided the rest among himself and my 3 brothers. I noticed their portions were much thinner than mine, mostly just water. My father's bowl was practically clear broth, but he drank it without a word, expression completely calm. I looked down at my own bowl, packed full of corn kernels, and felt that strange tug in my chest again. I said nothing and finished every drop. Right after breakfast, a sharp whistle sounded. Shania appeared in the distance, yelling that it was time for work. My father got up immediately and gathered my brothers. I stood up to follow, but he stopped me flat. "You stay home and rest." My mother agreed. I should stay. But then my father told her to stay home too. She argued if she didn't work, she wouldn't earn work points, and without points there'd be no grain come winter. My father's voice was firm. "In all our years of marriage, I've never let you do a single day of labor.
That's not changing now.
I can earn enough points to feed you and our daughter." When Bob backed him up, telling her to stay home, look after the grandparents, and leave the earning to them. Xin Yuan puffed out his chest and declared each of them was worth 3 workers. Before my mother could argue further, they were gone. She stood there, managing, for once, not to cry. Then she went to wash the dishes in a bucket of clean water my brothers must have fetched earlier. I told her I wanted to go look around. I needed an excuse to get away so I could start pulling supplies out of my space. If we kept drinking watered-down corn soup every day, everyone was going to lose their minds. She told me to be careful and come back by lunch. I walked toward the village. With everyone out working, the place was almost empty, just some elderly people and small children. The houses were all single-story with little courtyards and low walls. Some had a few vegetables growing in the corners. That was still allowed, even though everything else belonged to the collective. The old people were skin and bones, hollow-eyed, sitting outside their doors, looking like they were just waiting for life or death. I couldn't tell. The children were even worse. Thin as sticks, barely any flesh on them. A lot of them didn't even have clothes and were running around completely naked. I sighed. This place was truly poor. No wonder Hualingxiu said we were heading to hell. Compared to the capital, that's exactly what this was. I was about to explore more when a piercing scream cut through the air, the kind only a small child can make, sharp enough to split the sky. I ran toward the sound immediately. Behind a hill on the edge of the village, a group of children were crowded around something. When I pushed through, I saw a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, lying on the ground, rolling in agony with both hands pressed over his eyes. Blood was seeping through his fingers. My voice went serious immediately. "What happened here?" The children were so panicked they could barely speak. When they finally looked up and saw me, they froze. Apparently they thought some kind of fairy had appeared. I had to ask twice before the oldest kid managed to answer. A boy named Gooden had been hit in the eye by a marble from a slingshot. I crouched down and pulled the little boy upright. I told him to move his hands so I could see, but he was in too much pain to respond, just screaming and crying. I had to pry his hands away myself. Everyone gasped. There was a hole in his right eye, blood pouring out non-stop. Some of the smaller children started wailing too. This was serious. I scooped the boy up immediately and asked where the hospital was. No hospital in the village. I asked about a doctor. They said there was a barefoot doctor, basically the village's only medical person. I told the oldest kid to lead me there, and told the others to go find Gooden's parents. Meanwhile, out in the fields, the Hua family, my father and brothers, were harvesting corn. Nobody talked to them because of our family status, but they kept their heads down and worked hard. They were getting faster and faster, driven by the thought that more work points meant more food for the family. That's when the crying children arrived at the fields, sending the workers into a panic. One woman recognized her own child and checked him over. The kid could only sob out that something had happened to Gooden and that there was a lot of blood. Since Gooden was the production team leader's son, and the team leader was the village chief's son-in-law, this was a big deal. The woman rushed off to find Gooden's mother. I reached the barefoot doctor's house. The kid with me screamed at the top of his lungs that Gooden was bleeding to death. Old Dr. Zhao shuffled out slowly. He was used to village kids getting scrapes. But the moment he saw the unconscious child in my arms with blood-soaked bandages over his eye, his casual pace turned into a sprint. He examined the wound, and his fingers started shaking.
This is too serious for me.
He needs to go to the county hospital. I told him I'd already sent for the parents, but he said they were working on the back mountain, a half-hour round trip at least. With an injury this severe, waiting could cost the child his life. I didn't know the way to the county, so Zhao told me to follow him. He grabbed some supplies, wrapped Gooden's eye with a clean cloth, and we rushed out. He left a child at his door with instructions. When Gooden's parents show up, tell them to bring money and get to the county hospital. I'd only gone out this morning to explore the area and find a chance to pull supplies from my space. I hadn't planned on any of this, but I'd already gotten involved. I couldn't just drop the kid halfway. At the village entrance, I spotted the donkey cart from yesterday, tied to the old tree. Zhao untied it. Technically, you needed permission to use it since it belonged to the collective, but there was no time for paperwork. I climbed on with Gooden, and Zhao cracked the whip hard. He drove like a madman the entire way. Livestock was valuable, but not more valuable than a child's life. I was a mess from the wind, but I kept the boy protected in my arms. The moment we reached the county hospital, I jumped off the cart and told Zhao I'd take the child in while he parked. I ran inside shouting for help. The medical staff rushed over, took one look at Gooden, and called for emergency surgery. They put him on a gurney and wheeled him straight to the operating room. I followed every step of the way until the doors closed in front of me. I waited outside the operating room. Zhao rushed over and asked how things were. I told him the boy was in surgery, and we didn't know yet. Before the doctor came out, Village Chief Wang arrived with 5 or 6 people. Gooden's mother, a sun-darkened woman, threw herself at Zhao, begging to know about her son. When she heard the word emergency, her legs gave out. Her husband caught her and told her not to panic. Wang noticed me and frowned, asking why I was there. Zhao explained that I was the one who'd carried Gooden down and brought him in. Wang looked at me differently after that. He said he'd remember this kindness. I could tell he understood that as a reformed target who'd just arrived yesterday, I had no obligation to help. The fact that I did meant something to him. He seemed like a decent village chief. Then the operating room doors opened. A doctor in a white coat came out, and Gooden's mother rushed at him. The news was devastating. The marble had completely destroyed Gooden's right eye. They'd removed the eyeball, but the marble itself was lodged in a dangerous position. The hospital had pooled every surgeon they had, and none of them could complete the operation. He told them they could take the child home. He didn't say it directly, but everyone understood. Taking him home meant waiting for him to die. Gooden's mother collapsed to her knees, grabbing the doctor's arm, begging him to save her only child. The doctor helped her up and explained that this small county hospital simply didn't have anyone capable of performing the surgery. She fainted on the spot. Wang stepped forward, the calmest person in the group, though even his voice was shaking. He asked if there was truly nothing to be done. The doctor shook his head and said a hospital in the capital might have been able to help. Wang steadied himself, took a deep breath, and told them to bring Gooden home, at least let him pass in familiar surroundings. His daughter woke up just in time to hear that and nearly fainted again, crawling to her father's feet, begging. Then she tried to rush into the operating room, but collapsed before she made it 2 steps. The family members who'd come along were all crying. Someone explained that Gooden's mother had fallen into water years ago, damaged her health, and spent 3 years trying to conceive. She'd taken so much medicine before finally having Gooden. This child was everything to her. I stood to the side, watching everyone cry, and my eyes flickered. Then I walked past the group and approached the doctor. "Can I try?" Every pair of eyes snapped to me. The doctor looked me up and down. Are you a doctor?" "I've studied medicine," I said. That was true, in my previous life. In this life, the only thing I've operated on is pigs. He dismissed me immediately. Too young, a girl, probably joking. This was life and death, not a game. I kept my voice calm. "You just said no one in this hospital can do the surgery. Taking the child home means death. The outcome is already decided. So, what's the harm in letting me try? It can't possibly get worse than this." He hesitated, saying it wasn't proper procedure. I pointed out that if the family agreed, it wouldn't be breaking any rules. That's when Wang spoke up.
Let her try.
No matter what happens, we will never hold the hospital responsible. Someone in his family questioned whether this was reckless.
Wang cut them off.
You all heard the doctor. Taking Gooden home is a death sentence. I'd rather give him this one slim chance. He kept his eyes on me the whole time. The others didn't know my background, but Wang did. He knew we'd come from the capital. People from powerful families in Beijing might just have real skills. The village chief has good judgment, I said with a slight smile. That was exactly why I'd spoken up. I could tell Wang was the kind of person who could read a situation clearly. Wang turned to the doctor and added, "Let her try. She's from the capital." The doctor's attitude shifted the moment he heard that. "You're from Beijing?" I confirmed I was from the capital. The doctor looked at me, then at village chief Wang, and finally agreed to let me in. Old Zhao asked if I was really confident. I thought about it and said, 50-50. Then I walked through the doors. I changed into surgical clothes and entered the operating room. Gooden was lying on the table, pale as paper, while an assistant worked on his wound. The assistant was confused about who I was, but Dr. Sun covered for me, saying the patient's family had brought me in. The assistant stepped aside. Dr. Sun told me the rest was in my hands and that he hoped I wouldn't disappoint him. I said nothing and went straight to the operating table. I examined Gooden carefully. I'd already gotten an initial sense of the injury back on the hillside, but now I could see clearly it was tricky. The marble was lodged deep, positioned dangerously close to the back. The surgery wasn't just difficult technically. One small mistake could damage the brain's nerves. Even if the marble came out successfully, there could be serious complications: infection, paralysis, or brain damage. The brain is incredibly delicate. Dr. Sun watched me examine the boy. My hands were steady, my expression calm. He could tell I'd seen situations like this before, and he fully believed me now about having medical training. He seemed impressed that someone from the capital who'd merely studied medicine could handle an operating table so naturally when his own newly assigned doctors needed months to adjust. "Scalpel," I said, holding out my hand. The assistant froze, but Dr. Sun reacted first. He placed the scalpel in my palm before he even realized what he was doing. Afterward, he looked a little stunned at himself. He told me later that when I spoke, he felt like he was back as a young trainee following his mentor's commands. I tuned everything out and focused on the surgery. At first, neither Sun nor the assistant expected much. But as I worked, their expressions changed. They leaned in closer, watching intently. My hand with the scalpel was rock steady. I navigated precisely around every nerve and located the marble that had stumped their entire hospital. "Forceps," I said. This time the assistant handed them over instantly, no hesitation. Outside, the Wang family was growing more anxious with every passing minute. Wang's son suggested that maybe something had gone wrong and worried that Gooden might die in the hospital instead of at home, which in their local custom meant his spirit would wander forever, unable to find its way back. Wang shut him down firmly. "No news is good news. Wait." After more than half an hour, the doors finally opened. Everyone was too afraid to rush forward. They just stared. Dr. Sun pulled off his mask, barely containing his excitement. The surgery was a success. "The patient is out of immediate danger." Wang's straight back finally bent. He kept repeating, "Thank you, thank you." But Sun pointed at me. "Don't thank me. Thank her. Her surgical skills are like something out of legend." Wang turned and gave me a deep, formal bow. I quickly helped him up and told him Gooden was simply lucky. Then Sun grabbed his chance. "Would you like to work at our hospital? With skills like yours, even without a medical license, I could convince the director to hire you." I had to turn him down. "I'm sorry, but I'm a reformed target who's just been sent down to Shima village. Any changes to my assignment have to go through the authorities. I'm afraid I can't accept." Sun's face fell. "A reformed target? No wonder someone this talented ended up in a place like ours. What a waste." He knew that even the hospital director couldn't override that kind of status. If I'd been an educated youth volunteer, they could have worked something out, but a reformed target was untouchable. I noticed Wang watching Sun's reaction carefully, recalculating my value in his mind. A young woman whose medical skills left the county's senior doctor speechless. In an era when doctors were desperately scarce and villagers rarely made the long trip to the county hospital for treatment. I could practically see the idea forming behind his eyes. Wang arranged for Gooden's parents to stay at the hospital overnight and said he'd send someone to relieve them in the morning. The rest of us would head back to the village. Before getting on the donkey cart, I spoke up. I told Wang I wanted to stop by the supply cooperative to buy a few things. We didn't even have a decent bowl at home. He nodded, knowing how bad conditions were at our cow shed. He insisted on taking me there himself, rather than letting me walk back alone, saying if I got lost, they'd have to come looking for me. I accepted gratefully. I could tell he was doing me a favor. At the cooperative, there was just one girl with braids dozing behind the counter. I asked for a few bowls, a jean of meat, and 5 jean of white rice. She asked if I had ration tickets. I didn't. The inspection team had taken everything from the Hor family. Without tickets, things cost more, but I didn't mind. Everything came to 2.50 yuan. I also bought a cloth bag for 20 cents, just 2 pieces of fabric stitched together. Nothing fancy, but sturdy. I needed something to carry my purchases in since I'd be riding back with the Wang family, and I didn't want my supplies on full display. On the ride home, nobody said a word, but I caught people sneaking glances at my stuffed bag. In this era, just being able to shop at the cooperative made you special. The villagers could barely afford to go there once a year. But since Wang didn't question me, nobody else dared to either. I hopped off the cart at the old tree by the village entrance and thanked Wang. He said he should be the one thanking me for saving Gooden. I told him I'd been gone a long time and my family was probably worried, then headed home. On the way back, Wang's son Qingshan couldn't hold his curiosity. He asked his father how a reform target had money for the cooperative and suggested that if they had extra supplies, maybe they could share with the village since everyone was struggling. Wang shut that down immediately. Don't get any ideas about them. Without that girl, Gooden would be dead. He reminded Qingshan that reform targets got searched thoroughly. They couldn't possibly have much. Then he told his son to make sure nobody in the village bullied our family. Qingshan tightened his belt another notch. That's how you trick your stomach into feeling less hungry around here. Meanwhile, once I was alone on the path and sure nobody was watching, I started pulling things from my space and stuffing them into the cloth bag. The cooperative purchases were just a cover story. The real supplies were in my storage space. I kept adding things until the bag was about to burst, then gave up and decided I'd find another chance later. Back at the cow shed, the whole family was already home from work. My mother had made corn porridge again for lunch, a bit thicker than breakfast, with some greens and winter melon mixed in. At least you could stand a chopstick up in it this time. My father and brothers had worked all morning on empty stomachs and were clearly exhausted and hungry, but not one of them had started eating without me. Min Shue was worried I'd lost track of time. Xin Yuan was ready to go search for me, thinking something might have happened. My father was about to send all 3 brothers out looking when they spotted me walking toward the cow shed. Xin Yuan sprinted over to greet me. His smile froze when he saw the huge, bulging bag in my arms. "Little sister, what's in there? Let's talk at home," I whispered to Xin Yuan. He glanced around to make sure nobody was following me, then hurried back with me. When I set the bulging cloth bag down in front of the family, everyone's eyes went wide. My mother tried to take it from me and nearly dropped it. She couldn't believe how heavy it was. I opened it carefully, and the moment they saw what was inside, their jaws dropped. My father reacted first. He quickly covered it back up, looked around nervously, and asked where I'd gotten all of it. I told them about my morning, finding the injured boy, carrying him to the doctor, rushing him to the county hospital, and performing the surgery myself. They were stunned silent for a long time. "You know medicine?" Wenba stared at me. I told him my adoptive father had arranged for me to learn when I was younger, but I stopped after he passed away. That wasn't entirely a lie. The real Su Miaomiao's teacher had died long ago, so nobody could verify my actual skill level. Nobody questioned it. I told them not to feel guilty about me. My adoptive father had treated me like his own daughter, and I'd had a decent life. But none of them were buying it. In their minds, nothing could compare to what I should have had as a commander's daughter. I pulled out several steaming meat buns and handed them to Wenba to distribute, grandparents and parents first. Of course, both my parents tried to give theirs to me. So I just pulled out more buns and said nobody needed to sacrifice. There was enough for everyone. One bite was all it took. Wenba said he felt his exhaustion vanish instantly. That watery corn porridge from breakfast had worn off within half an hour, and he'd been running on pure willpower for the rest of the morning. The twins dug in happily. Even my father, a military man his whole life, couldn't hold back his emotions. He took a bite and had to quietly wipe his eyes. He'd spent his whole career trying to provide for his family, and now his long-lost daughter was the one feeding them. My mother noticed and silently took his hand. Nobody spoke. We all just ate our buns and finished off the corn porridge. Nothing was wasted. After lunch, my father and brothers rested briefly, then headed back to work when the whistle blew. This time my mother insisted on going too, and my father couldn't talk her out of it. Even my grandparents went to cut grass nearby to feed the water buffalo. That left me alone. I didn't rush to join the field work. Honestly, I wasn't good at it, and the effort-to-reward ratio was terrible, which violated my life principle of getting fair pay for fair work. Instead, I tidied up our place. With almost nothing to organize, it took no time at all. Then I sat at the doorstep, watching clouds drift by. I was waiting for someone, and sure enough, just before the end of the workday, Village Chief Wang came walking toward me with his pipe. I stood up to greet him. He looked around the cow shed. We'd cleaned it up nicely, and nodded approvingly. He'd been watching the Hor family during the afternoon shift too. Everyone worked hard, nobody slacked off. My father was attentive to my mother, and my brothers were respectful to their parents. A family like that, he figured, wouldn't raise bad people. After some small talk about my situation, he got to the point. The village only had old Zhao as its barefoot doctor, self-taught, barely able to handle headaches, often ineffective, which slowed down the village's productivity. My surgical skills had been vouched for by the county hospital's own doctor. If you could help old Zhao at the clinic, the village's medical problems would be solved. And I'll give you full work points every day. That was his offer. And it was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I agreed to Wang's offer without hesitation. His face lit up, one of the village's biggest problems solved. But I pointed out that when I'd visited old Zhao's place, there were almost no medical supplies or medicine. Wang sighed and admitted the village was too poor to buy medicine. Zhao mostly used herbs he gathered from the mountains himself. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. I told Wang that mountain herbs, used properly, could be just as effective as Western medicine. He was surprised. He'd assumed I only knew surgery. I told him I knew some traditional Chinese medicine too. He was thrilled. Then I asked the question I'd been building toward. Could I go into the mountains to gather medicinal herbs? In this era, even the grass on the hillside belonged to the collective, so I needed permission. Wang agreed immediately. He called it serving the people. I asked when I should start. He said tomorrow, if possible, since there were too many sick people for Zhao to handle alone. I said yes. He thanked me with genuine respect. In this era, people with real skills were admired regardless of age or gender. I smiled and told him I was doing it for myself too. After he left, I felt genuinely good. This arrangement was perfect. I checked the time and got to work on dinner. I took out the meat and rice I'd bought at the cooperative. I cooked enough rice for 8 people, then started slicing the pork belly. Beautiful cuts, even thickness, perfect for stir-frying with peppers. My knife skills have always been excellent. I pulled some green peppers from my space and prepped them. One dish wasn't enough for 8 people, so I added winter melon and pork rib soup, hand-torn cabbage, and smashed cucumber salad. Generous portions of everything. In my previous life, I loved cooking during my downtime between missions. I'd planned to work at a restaurant after retiring. Never expected I'd transmigrate instead. Then 18 years of butchering pigs with old Sue only sharpened my skills further. Everything except the soup was done in under half an hour. We had no table, so I spread a cloth on the floor and arranged the dishes. Just as I brought in the soup, I heard the family returning. Xin Yuan was sniffing the air frantically at the door. "Brother, do you smell meat?" Minxue thought he was hallucinating from hunger. He was so exhausted he could barely speak, practically dragging his feet. Of the three brothers, Miaomiao was the weakest physically. He loved literature and had never been to military training like Wenba and Xinyuan. A full day of hard labor had nearly destroyed him. My grandparents came back too, carrying a basket of grass they'd cut for the buffalo. Everyone was standing at the doorway, confused. I stepped out and told them dinner was ready. My mother looked shocked. She'd been about to force herself to cook. When I opened the door wider, the smell hit them full force. Xinyuan charged inside, saw the spread on the floor, and his eyes nearly fell out. "Get in here. There's actually meat." I was grateful we lived far from the village. With Xinyuan yelling like that, neighbors would have heard for sure. Everyone filed in and saw the food: white rice, spicy pork with peppers, rib soup, cabbage, and cucumber salad. They were just as stunned as Xinyuan. Xinyuan took the first bowl of rice I offered but immediately handed it to our grandmother. She tried to refuse, but I kept scooping. There was enough for everyone. Nobody cared about manners or that we were eating on the floor. They sat down and devoured everything. Xinyuan kept praising me between mouthfuls, saying my cooking was better than the fancy restaurants in the capital. My mother had abandoned all her usual elegance, face shiny with grease. Since old Sue died, I'd always eaten alone. Watching all of them eat together, I thought maybe having this many people around wasn't so unbearable after all. Then my father looked down at his bowl of white rice and spoke. "Miaomiao, you can't keep doing this." The moment my father said that, everyone turned on him. My mother tugged his sleeve and scolded him for criticizing me after I'd worked so hard cooking. Xinyuan called him confused. Even Grandpa set down his bowl and glared, looking ready to invoke family discipline. My father quickly explained. He wasn't blaming me. He just meant that white rice and meat were precious, and they should be saved for me and the grandparents. He and my brothers could eat corn grits. My mother relaxed, then teased him about whether hardship had changed his personality. He shook his head and looked at me gently, repeating that I should keep the good food for myself and the elders. I told him not to worry. The village chief had arranged a light job for me, so I'd be earning work points too. That set him off. He jumped up, ready to drag me to Wang's house and refuse on my behalf. He didn't believe any job here could be light. I explained quickly. Wang wanted me to help old Zhao, the village's only barefoot doctor. No field work, full work points every day, and I just had to be there whether patients showed up or not. Xinyuan agreed it sounded way easier than farm labor. But my mother worried. If I made a mistake treating someone, the whole village could turn against us. My father said the same. They all offered to support me, so I wouldn't have to work at all. I was a little exasperated. I really wanted to know just how fragile they thought I was. But they meant well, so I patiently explained that I'd only handle simple cases and send anything serious to the county hospital. Besides, staying home with nothing to do was boring. They finally let it go, though my mother reminded me to be careful. We finished eating. After dinner, I brought up something that had been bothering me. My father and brothers were sleeping in the cowshed. Half the roof was rotting, the walls were just a few nailed boards, and the skinny buffalo right next door made the smell unbearable. They needed proper rest after a full day of hard labor. I suggested to my mother that we split the 2 rooms by gender, women in one, men in the other. She lit up immediately. She'd grown up with private rooms her whole life, so the idea of shared dormitories hadn't crossed her mind. She rushed off to tell my father. As I expected, my father came to check with me. He worried that my grandmother's nighttime coughing would disturb my sleep. I told him I slept like a rock. Even thunder wouldn't wake me. That was a complete lie, of course. My training made me alert to the slightest sound, but it put his mind at ease. We rearranged men's room and women's room. A bit crowded, but at least everyone had a roof overhead. That night, my grandmother did cough, but she deliberately kept it quiet, afraid of waking us. I turned over and fell asleep to the sound. The next morning, everyone was already up. My mother had made corn porridge again, this time mixed with a little white rice so it was thicker and easier to swallow. After breakfast, the work whistle blew. My mother told me to be careful at old Zhao's place and said she'd come back to make lunch. Once the family left, I headed to Zhao's house. Wang had already told him about me. The old man was waiting at his door, and when he saw me, he looked relieved. "There you are, girl. I've been waiting all morning." His eyes were warm and kind. After all, I'd saved a patient that the county hospital's own doctors had given up on. I apologized to old Zhao for being a little late. He waved it off and invited me inside to show me around the clinic, though calling it a clinic was generous. It was just a rundown house with a few bamboo trays of herbs drying in the yard. Zhao had been a soldier in his younger days. When he came home after the war, his parents were dead and his wife had drowned herself after being persecuted by the enemy. He never remarried. He'd picked up enough literacy during his military years to teach himself some basic Chinese medicine, and eventually Wang had him convert his house into the village clinic. I looked at his herbs. They were common, low-quality stuff. He explained that he was getting too old to climb the mountains, so he could only gather what grew at the base. I asked how much medicine he had in total. He gestured at the 3 trays in front of me. That was it. Not even enough for 3 prescriptions. Drought had made everything worse. I told him I'd go up the mountain to look for more. He warned me to be careful on the rough paths and not to go too deep because of wild animals. I took a basket and headed up. The lower slopes were picked clean. Villagers had stripped the mountainside for firewood over the years since they couldn't afford coal. I had to push deeper where the undergrowth was thick and tangled. It was hard going, but I started finding good herbs. I got so focused on gathering that I didn't notice how far in I'd gone. When I finally looked up, the trees were so tall and dense they blocked out the sky. I remembered Zhao's warning about wild animals. My basket was about 70% full, so I decided to turn back. Then I heard something behind me. I spun around, eyes sharp, gripping my sickle. The air smelled faintly of blood. My instincts kicked in. If it was a big animal, we have extra meat for dinner tonight. I moved forward quickly, but then a dark shape came tumbling down the slope. Pure reflex, I kicked it hard, sending it flying. Then I heard a groan. A very human groan. My expression froze. I walked over and looked. It was a person. A man, covered head to toe in blood and mud, lying at the base of a tree. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. I frowned. Had I just kicked a man to death? I was considering whether to run when he coughed weakly.
"Fine.
Consider yourself lucky," I muttered and crouched down to check his injuries. The moment my hand reached toward him, he grabbed my wrist. A pair of eyes, sharp as an eagle's, locked onto mine. In that instant, I recognized something in him. I was absolutely certain this man had killed before. He asked who I was. I was about to answer when I noticed an insignia on his shoulder beneath all the blood and dirt. "You're a soldier?" I asked. He confirmed he was a villager's neighbor. No, he asked if I was from the village below. I said yes, and my attitude improved considerably. I'd been ready to walk away because picking up injured strangers on a mountainside is a recipe for disaster. But a military man was different. I told him his injuries were severe and offered to carry him down the mountain.
But he stopped me.
His name was Liu Shuyuan, a colonel in the 123rd Regiment. He was on a secret mission. A traitor in his unit had led to an ambush, and his entire squad had been killed. He was the only survivor. "Are they still chasing you?" I asked, catching the most important detail. He nodded. The enemies had no weapons but outnumbered him. If he came with me, the whole village could be endangered. "Then why are you telling me all this?" I asked, abandoning the idea of bringing him down. He pulled a letter from inside his coat with great difficulty. Despite being drenched in blood everywhere else, the envelope was spotless. "This is classified intelligence we sacrificed enormously to recover. I need you to deliver it. You trust me with something this important." I looked at the envelope. He managed a weak smile. "Judging by how hard you kicked me just now, you've clearly had some training." I stiffened. Was he bringing that up on purpose? He gripped my hand tighter, his breathing getting weaker by the second. "Comrade, what's inside this envelope is critical. Many people have already died for it. I can die, but this cannot be lost. If you complete this mission, the organization will reward you." He thought my hesitation was a refusal. It wasn't. Where do you need me to deliver this letter? I asked, my voice steady. Lu Shuyuan fought to get every word out clearly. The handoff was June 18th at a church on Nan Mountain in Mo City. I had to find a middle-aged man wearing a black hat with a white flower pinned to his chest. I'd ask him what time it was. If he answered, "Dawn is coming," I'd give him the letter. Today was June 10th. 8 days. I took the envelope and asked what to do if the contact didn't show. He said to go back on the same date 1 month later. Someone would definitely be there. I tucked the letter into my clothes. After finishing his instructions, it was like the last thread holding him together snapped. All his strength drained away. I asked what he planned to do. He said he'd rest a moment, then lead his pursuers further away from the village. If he died here, they'd search the mountain and find us all. I understood. I rummaged through my herb basket. Lucky for you, you ran into me today. I found some herbs good for stopping bleeding, crushed them between 2 rocks, and told him to take off his shirt.
He didn't move.
Asked if he was worried I'd take advantage of him. He whispered that he simply had no strength left.
Right.
I pulled off his clothes myself. His muscular chest was covered in wounds, and there was what looked like a bullet hole in his left abdomen. I was impressed he'd managed to run this far in that condition. Was he made of iron? I pressed the herbal paste straight onto his wounds without any gentleness. He sucked in a sharp breath, but I wasn't about to be delicate. I tore his undershirt into strips and bandaged him up, explaining that without proper tools I couldn't extract the bullet, but the herbs would stop the bleeding temporarily. The pain seemed to sharpen his awareness. I caught him studying me, probably wondering how a young village girl could handle a blood-soaked man without flinching. I ignored his curiosity. I turned away and pretended to reach into my clothes, but actually pulled 3 slices of ginseng from my space. This was wild ginseng my adoptive father had gotten by chance, nearly 600 years old. 1 slice could keep a dying person breathing. I didn't have many left, but a soldier fighting for the country deserved my best. I pressed the 3 slices into his hand and told him to put one under his tongue whenever he felt himself fading. He looked at the ginseng. The color and quality were unmistakably premium. He managed a hoarse, "Thank you. I've done everything I can," I said, swinging my basket onto my back. "Whether you survive is up to your own luck. What's your name?" he called after me. I turned. "If you survive, I'll tell you." Then I left. I found a stream on my way down and washed all the blood off myself. Once I was sure nothing looked suspicious, I went back to old Zhao's place. He'd been about to come looking for me, worried I'd gotten lost. I told him I'd just found more herbs than expected and lost track of time. When he saw my nearly full basket, his eyes went huge. He scolded me for going into the deep forest alone, started to say I shouldn't go again, then looked at all those precious herbs and changed his tune. "Next time I'll send someone with you." He'd originally sent me alone as a test of my herbal medicine knowledge. Now he realized I was skilled in both Western and Chinese medicine, and wished he'd sent helpers so I could have carried back even more. He told me to rest while he sorted the herbs. As he worked, he got more and more excited. Mixed in with the common plants were some truly rare, valuable specimens. He made a mental note to tell Wang to take good care of her family. They absolutely could not let me leave. While he worked, I casually asked how far Mo City was from here. He said it was quite far, and asked why I wanted to know. I made up an excuse about the county cooperative having a poor selection, and wanting to check out the city instead. Old Zhao laughed at me for being picky about the county cooperative and explained that getting to Mo City would take 2 days round trip, first to the county, then a long-distance bus to the city. He didn't think it was worth the trouble just to go shopping. I agreed on the surface and dropped it. I'd figure out the trip to deliver Lu Shuyuan's letter another way. We chatted about herbs for the rest of the morning. No patience came. At noon, Zhao told me to go home for lunch. My mother had tried cooking. She'd made a big plate of stewed cabbage, no meat at all. Xing Yuan took 1 bite, and his face scrunched up. He tried to be nice about it, saying it was just a little worse than my cooking. My mother tasted it herself and nearly spit it out. She admitted she'd never set foot in a kitchen before being sent here, and wished she'd asked the family's cook for lessons. I ate it without expression and said it was fine, just needed less salt and more oil. I kept eating big mouthfuls to prove my point. That moved my mother, and the rest of the family followed my lead. Nobody wasted food, even though plain boiled cabbage with too much salt was miserable. We needed the energy for the afternoon. I went back to Zhao's in the afternoon. 2 patients came, one with a fever, one with diarrhea. I prescribed 1 dose each and told them to come back tomorrow. I would have given more, but we simply didn't have enough medicine. I thought my first day would end peacefully. I was wrong. Just before quitting time, a man in his 30s burst into the clinic yelling for Dr. Su. Before I could get a word in, he grabbed my hand and started running. Zhao chased after us, shouting at him to at least explain what was happening. The man, Wang Daniu, ran so fast that if I hadn't had my training, I couldn't have kept up. After 5 or 6 minutes, we reached his house. A crowd had gathered outside. He shoved through everyone, pulling me inside. The neighbors weren't offended. They knew this was life or death for 2 people. I could hear them talking behind us. Some doubted me. Too young, never given birth myself. How could I deliver a baby? Others brought up how I'd saved Gooden when the county hospital had given up. They went back and forth, but the consensus was, if the village chief trusted me enough to put me in the clinic, maybe I had real skills. Inside, on the bed, a woman in her 30s lay with her eyes closed, barely breathing. Her belly was huge. She was in labor, but it had gone wrong. The midwife's hands were covered in blood. She explained that the woman had no strength left, her cervix wasn't open enough, and the baby couldn't come out. Dania's mother, a woman in her 50s, was wailing about her grandchild. The midwife said there was only one option left: cut open the belly and take the baby out. In the countryside, with no real medical equipment, this was the most primitive form of surgery. Slice open the mother's stomach, pull the baby out. At least one of 2 lives saved. Brutal, but better than losing both. Dania's mother agreed immediately.
Cut.
At least save my grandchild. The midwife rolled up her sleeves, picked up a knife, and was about to slice into the woman's belly. Stop, I shouted from the doorway, rushed in, and snatched the knife right out of her hand. The midwife glared at me, furious.
Who are you?
Give that back. Every second counts. The baby could suffocate. Daniel stepped in front of the midwife to protect his wife. What are you trying to do to her? The midwife softened her tone. Daniel, your wife is gone. We need to at least save the child. You are going to cut Ahua open? Daniel stared at his mother and the midwife in shock. Daniel's mother tried to justify the decision. They couldn't just watch both mother and child die. But Daniel shoved everyone out, eyes red with fury. The midwife stumbled back, offended. She reminded him she was the most respected midwife in the region, responsible for delivering 9 out of 10 babies around here. Nobody had ever treated her this way. Daniel screamed that he'd found a real doctor and that his wife and baby would both be fine. Then he turned on the midwife for cursing them. She sneered at me, saying I was just a girl who'd never been pregnant and that I'd end up killing both mother and child. But then, a faint voice from the bed. Daniel. He spun around. His wife, Huang Chunhua, had opened her eyes. Her color was slightly better than before. He burst into tears of relief. I'd secretly slipped a piece of ginseng into her mouth while examining her. The baby still had to come out the natural way. If the mother stayed unconscious, both lives were lost. I ordered Daniel to prepare hot water and clean towels. With his wife awake, he trusted me completely and ran to get everything. The midwife stood there stunned. Moments ago, Chunhua had been at death's door. How is she conscious again? I told Chunhua to keep the ginseng under her tongue and conserve her strength. The baby was in breech position, feet first instead of head first. Normally, in a difficult case like this, you do a cesarean section, but we had no surgical equipment and no time to get her to the county hospital. The only option was to manually turn the baby. The midwife tried to discourage me, saying she'd already attempted to reposition the baby and it was too far off. I told her flatly, you couldn't do it. That doesn't mean I can't. She was furious but stepped back to watch, predicting I'd fail. I placed my hands on Chunhua's belly and began pushing, slowly, carefully. One wrong move could hurt the baby. Chunhua felt searing pain and nearly passed out again, biting down hard on the ginseng slice to stay conscious. Gradually, I felt the baby turning inside her. When the head finally pointed downward, I exhaled with relief. The baby's in position now. I'm going to guide you through delivery. Only push when I tell you to, I instructed. The midwife gasped. You actually turned it? I had no time for her. I positioned Chuanhua's legs and coached her breathing. My voice was calm and steady. Something about it seemed to settle her panic. She followed my instructions, and after several rounds of pushing, a loud cry filled the room. I looked at the baby in my hands and couldn't help smiling. I really did it. Chunhua was drenched in sweat, but smiling too. I cut the cord, wrapped the baby in a cloth, and set the child on the bed. Then I turned to check on Chunhua and froze. The bedding beneath her was soaked in blood.
Hemorrhaging.
The midwife recognized it instantly. Massive bleeding. Too much time had been lost. I snapped into command mode. Everyone out, I told Daniel. He was shaking. I told him if he wanted his wife to live, he needed to get everyone out now, and take the baby too. He scooped up his newborn, his first child, handling it like it was made of glass, and rushed out. I ordered the door shut behind him. Alone with Chunhua, who had already slipped back into unconsciousness, the ginseng had only lasted long enough for the delivery. I pulled a cloth bundle from my space and unrolled it. Inside were rows of silver acupuncture needles. In my previous life, the organization had brought in the greatest living master of traditional Chinese medicine to teach me. My needlework could practically bring the dead back to life. But this particular technique consumed enormous mental energy. I never used it unless a life was truly on the line. This qualified. I blocked out everything and focused completely. I pulled out a silver needle and drove it precisely into Chunhua's pressure point. As each needle went in, the tip trembled faintly with a shimmer of white light. With every needle I placed, my face grew paler and sweat beaded on my forehead. Outside, the villagers were peering at the windows and door, trying to see what was happening. They were debating among themselves, could anyone really survive postpartum hemorrhaging? Someone mentioned a woman in the neighboring village who'd bled out even at a hospital. But others pointed out that I'd already delivered a baby everyone thought was impossible. Maybe I really did have extraordinary skills. Dania stood outside clutching his newborn, heart pounding, desperate to rush in but not daring to until I said so. I don't know how long it took. Long enough that Dania's arms went numb from holding the baby. Finally, I pushed the door open and leaned against the frame, barely able to stand. Your wife is fine, I told him, my voice floating and weak. She lost a lot of blood. Feed her something nutritious. Dania dropped to his knees right there, baby in his arms, kowtowing over and over. He and Chunhua were childhood sweethearts from neighboring villages. They'd been married almost 10 years, and this was their first child. He'd nearly lost both of them. I didn't even have the strength to help him up. I told him to go check on his wife, and dragged myself toward home. But halfway there, everything started spinning. My legs felt like cotton. In the distance, I thought I saw a familiar figure. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the straw bed at home. My mother was right beside me, eyes swollen and red, asking if I was okay, if anything hurt, if she should find a doctor. She knew and pointed out that I was the doctor. I asked what time it was. My mother said it was almost dawn. I'd been unconscious since she knew and carried me home, and they'd been terrified. I told her I was just exhausted, nothing more. She wasn't having it. She said my face had been frighteningly white when she knew and brought me back, and she wanted me to quit the clinic job. She'd earn work points to support me herself. That made me laugh, and something warm stirred inside me. This life hadn't been too unkind. Old Sue had been with me for the first 15 years, and now I had the whole Hua family. I tried to reassure her, but then came a knock at the door. Everyone was surprised nobody in the village ever came out this far to visit reform targets. Wenba went to answer. It was Daniu, looking nervous when he saw my brother's face. He said his wife and baby were both doing well and handed Wenba a bag as thanks. Wenba tried to return it, but Daniu was already hurrying away. Inside the bag were sweet potatoes and regular potatoes, the best things a villager here could offer. My eyes softened. I told them to put it away. Wenba started to say something, probably about me quitting the clinic, but I cut him off by closing my eyes. I'm still tired. Let me sleep a bit more. They all filed out. Once they were gone, I opened my eyes again. I knew Wenba wanted me to stop working at the clinic, but if I did, all my future plans would fall apart. I'd have to deflect for now. But I really was exhausted. In this body, without the rigorous physical training from my previous life, the acupuncture technique had taken a much heavier toll than expected. I needed proper rest. I closed my eyes and slept again. When I woke the next morning, it was already almost 10 o'clock. The room was empty, everyone gone. I got up and found porridge warming on the stove outside. A small bowl of pure white rice kept hot in a pot of water, still steaming. They'd saved the good rice, just for me. I smiled and drank every drop of that rice porridge. It was clearly set aside just for me. The rest of the family wouldn't touch white rice themselves. After washing the bowl, I felt about 70 or 80% recovered, so I headed up the mountain alone. I retraced my steps to where I'd found Lu Shiyuan. The spot was completely empty, not even a trace of blood. I raised an eyebrow. He was thorough. I gathered some herbs while I was up there, then brought them to old Zhao's place. He scolded me for not resting. I told him I was fine and that I'd gathered the herbs for a reason. I wanted to process them, take them to the city to sell, and use the money to buy real medicine and medical equipment for our clinic.
He was surprised.
I explained what had happened the day before. I got lucky, no one died. But I couldn't guarantee I'd save everyone every time without proper supplies and tools. The acupuncture technique I'd used drained me too severely to rely on it for every patient. Zhao agreed it was a good idea, but said I'd need the village chief's approval since I'd be using public resources, the mountain herbs. I said of course, but I'd wanted to tell him first since I'd need his help processing the medicine. He could tell I was already confident Wang would agree. This is about the entire village's health, I said. I don't think the chief will refuse. Zhao decided to go talk to Wang himself. Within an hour, he came back grinning. Wang had not only approved but was sending 2 people to help me gather herbs tomorrow. With that settled, Zhao shooed me home to rest. I went, but then remembered my mother's cooking from yesterday. I decided to handle dinner myself. I made rice with sweet potato and regular potato mixed in. It comes out softer and more fragrant that way. For meat, I pulled a prepared rabbit from my space. I'd bought it from a farmer back when I worked at the state-run restaurant. I'd just tell the family I caught it on the mountain. The rabbit was over 8 jin. I chopped it up with plenty of dried chilies and made a huge pot of spicy stir-fried rabbit. In case anyone couldn't handle spice, I also made vinegar-tossed shredded potatoes. Only 2 dishes, but the portions were generous, enough for 8. Around quitting time, I heard my family approaching. Xin Yuan was practically dragging himself home. It was harvest season. Everyone was picking corn non-stop like machines. After 2 days, his hands didn't feel like his own anymore. His stomach was screaming. He mentioned that several villagers had collapsed in the fields that morning. Too thin, too little food, too much work. He was secretly glad I wasn't out there, saying with my small frame I'd have fainted within an hour. He was trying to put on a brave face so I wouldn't worry, but then he caught the smell. His eyes went wide. I smell something. Little sister definitely made something good. My mother picked up the pace too, worried that I was cooking instead of resting. When they arrived, I told them dinner was ready. My mother fussed, saying I should be resting, not working in the kitchen. But Xin Yuan couldn't resist. He peeked inside, and his jaw dropped. Little sister, what's that red stuff you made? Spicy, stir-fried rabbit. It's better hot, bring the rice in. He grabbed the pot and charged inside. My father, though, paused and asked where the rabbit came from. He knew it hadn't been in my earlier supplies. I told my parents I'd caught the rabbit while gathering herbs on the mountain. Then I lowered my voice and reminded them to keep it quiet. With our status as reformed targets, if the villagers found out we had meat, it could cause trouble. My father looked uneasy. He's a military man to the bone. Never take a single needle or thread from the people is practically carved into his soul. But my mother swatted his arm and told him to appreciate what I'd done for the family. I explained that I'd already checked with old Zhao. Villagers were allowed to keep small game they caught on the mountain, Only big animals had to be handed over. My father relaxed, and my mother scolded him for his rigid principles that had landed the whole family in this mess. He started apologizing immediately. He's never been good with words. I teased my mother, saying she'd only followed him here because she believed in those principles. She got flustered, and my father grinned ear to ear. Xin Yuan appeared at the door, practically begging us to come eat before the food got cold. He'd been staring at that massive pot of rabbit, and the agony of not being able to dig in was killing him. Everyone devoured the food. Xin Yuan gave me a thumbs up between every mouthful. My grandparents couldn't handle much spice but still tried a few bites. The room was filled with nothing but the sounds of eating. After dinner, Xin Yuan patted his belly and said that if he could eat my cooking every day, this life wouldn't be so bad. I offered to cook daily. My mother immediately shut that down. She'd cook from now on. She insisted. The room went quiet. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Xin Yuan opened his mouth and closed it. Nobody could say it out loud. My mother's cooking was terrible, but they also didn't want me doing all the work. I finally told the truth gently. Mom, I don't think you have much talent for cooking. She froze, then realized what I meant. Xin Yuan silently added in his head that not much talent was an understatement. Back in the capital, even the family dog wouldn't have eaten her food. My mother sputtered, unable to form a sentence. I told her cooking was something I genuinely enjoyed, not a chore. If she wanted to help, she could come home early to tend the fire. She reluctantly agreed, especially since she couldn't deny the evidence. Xin Yuan was overjoyed. He practically wanted to pick me up and spin me around. He volunteered to fetch water for baths, and Wenba joined him. Everyone naturally divided up the remaining chores without being asked, making sure I didn't have to lift another finger. I appreciated that. Relationships should be give and take. If the Hor family had treated my efforts as something they were owed, I would have pulled back. The next morning, I headed to the clinic while the rest of the family went to work. When I arrived, 2 young strangers were standing in the main room. A neat-looking young man in a dark blue shirt, and a girl with a long braid and a polka-dot blouse, a little pink in the cheeks. She looked healthier than the scrawny villagers. Old Zhao came out, and his face brightened when he saw me, which was very different from the cold reception he'd apparently given these two. The girl, Deng Xiue, was sizing me up, and her stare was anything but friendly. I could practically read her thoughts. How did a woman with my political status land a cushy clinic job? She'd apparently tried to get this position herself, even sweet-talking the village chief and volunteering to help. She didn't get it. Now she was looking at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to her. Did I get it just because of my face? That's clearly what she was thinking. I caught her hostile gaze immediately and turned to meet it. Our eyes locked. Deng Xiue didn't expect me to turn around so suddenly. She couldn't pull her gaze back in time and looked away awkwardly. The guy next to her, the one in the blue shirt, smiled at me. I ignored him. He didn't seem bothered. Old Zhao introduced them. The man was Cheng Haoqiang and the woman was Deng Xiue, both educated youth from the youth quarters. They'd been assigned to accompany me into the mountains to gather herbs. Apparently they'd both studied a little medicine and could recognize some plants. Zhao had already prepared 3 baskets. I grabbed my tools and left without much conversation. Cheng Haoqiang said goodbye to Zhao and hurried after me. Deng Xiue followed silently, clearly annoyed that the old man treated her coldly while being warm to me. Cheng tried to make small talk, saying we should stick together for safety. I told him to just follow me. I'm not someone who makes friends easily. I know exactly how ugly human nature can be. Sure, I'd been lucky enough to meet old Sue and the Hor family, but bad people always outnumber good ones. Otherwise, the Hor family wouldn't have ended up in a place like this. At first, Cheng kept up with my pace. Then he started falling behind. Deng Xiue was even worse. She was trailing far behind with an empty basket, panting like she'd run a marathon. I couldn't believe it. They'd been in the countryside for a while now, and still hadn't built any stamina? Cheng asked if we could stop and wait for Deng to catch up. I looked back at her gasping behind an empty basket and decided I was better off alone. I told him to wait for her while I went ahead. Before he could argue, I was gone. I moved quickly through the rough terrain. It felt like flat ground to me. I started gathering herbs the moment I entered the forest, taking everything I could find. The clinic was dangerously low on supplies, so I couldn't be picky. My eyes were sharp, my hands fast, and I slipped through thorny undergrowth like it was nothing. About half an hour later, the two of them finally caught up, sweating and exhausted. Deng Xiue dropped to the ground and glared at me with pure resentment. I told them there were plenty of herbs in the area and that we should split up, meeting back here when the sun was directly overhead. Cheng tried to say something, but I'd already disappeared into a thicket. What I didn't know was what Cheng was thinking. He'd done his research on me, heard about how I'd saved the village chief's grandson and Dania's wife. He figured I must be someone important to the chief, so he dressed in his best clothes this morning, shaved and washed up, all to impress me. And I hadn't given him a single proper look. Apparently, he was popular with women both in the city and here. My complete indifference baffled him. He even wondered if I was playing hard to get. If I'd known he was thinking that, I would have kicked him down the mountain and regretted ever speaking to him. But I was happily buried in herb gathering. By the time I filled my entire basket and headed back to the meeting point, both of them were already waiting. I glanced at their baskets, and my brow furrowed immediately. Cheng's was barely a third full. Deng's had practically nothing, just a thin layer at the bottom. Sorry, there really weren't many herbs up here. We did our best, Cheng explained quickly. Not many herbs? I thought there were plenty, I said, setting down my basket, overflowing with medicinal plants. Cheng Haoqiang's expression froze. Deng Xiue finally exploded. She accused me of deliberately ditching them so I could hog all the good spots and take the credit. I gave her one look, cold enough to make her step backward. Then she remembered Cheng was right there and puffed herself back up, insisting she wasn't wrong. I told them both, calmly, that old Zhao had said they knew medicine and could recognize herbs. That was the only reason I'd agreed to bring them. If it turned out they'd been lying about their skills, I had no reason to waste my time dragging them along. That put the fear into Cheng immediately. He knew this mountain assignment was far cushier than harvesting corn in the fields, and if I told the village chief they were useless, he'd be back breaking his spine over corn stalks. He scrambled to explain. They only knew the basics. It was their first time on this mountain. They'd improve with practice. He made himself sound as eager and hardworking as possible.
I didn't respond.
I just glanced at him and walked away. That one look made him uneasy, like I'd seen right through him. He told himself that was impossible. How could a woman see through his act? He snapped at Deng Xiue to stop sitting around and chased after me. She was seething. In her eyes, I was arrogant and rude, and she couldn't understand why everyone kept orbiting around me. She'd had her eye on Cheng for years, secretly sharing her food rations with him, helping him whenever she could, and he never once reciprocated. Watching him chase after me made her want to claw my face off. When I reached the village entrance, a group of little kids ran past carrying buckets. They stopped when they saw me. The oldest one, Huzi, thanked me formally for saving Gooden. I told him it was nothing. These kids were pure-hearted, and I always had more patience for children than for scheming adults. Huzi held out his bucket. We caught these eels in the field. They're for you. Inside were 5 or 6 thumb-sized eels swimming around. My eyes lit up. Eels are delicious if you know how to cook them. Most villagers just boiled them in plain water, which tasted terrible. But with the seasonings in my space, I could make something wonderful. I told Huzi I couldn't take them for free. I reached into my pocket, actually pulling from my space, and took out a few white rabbit milk candies. The children's eyes went wide. They were practically drooling. But Huzi pinched his own thigh hard and forced himself to look away. He told me very seriously that the eels were a thank you gift for saving his best friend. If he took my candy, it wouldn't be a real thank you anymore. I couldn't help but smile. He had principles, this kid who looked maybe 6 or 7 years old, resisting candy. The little ones behind him were staring at my hand like starving wolves, but not a single one grabbed or begged. I crouched down and accepted the bucket. I'll take your thank you gift. Huzi beamed. His sun-darkened little face looked genuinely handsome when he smiled like that. He turned to leave with his crew. They were planning to catch more eels to bring to Gooden at the county hospital. Gooden had heard his eye trying to shoot birds for them to eat, and they weren't going to forget that. Wait, I called out. I told them I might need their help with something this afternoon, and the candy would be payment in advance. Huzi thought about it, then accepted the candy since it was fair exchange for work. I told them to come find me at the clinic after lunch and I'd explain. He agreed, and they ran off. The moment I was out of sight, the little ones swarmed Huzi, asking if the candy was really theirs. He shoved every piece into his pocket, put on a stern face, and declared, "Nobody touches these without my say-so." Back at the clinic, old Zhao was drying the herbs I'd gathered earlier. He was delighted to see another full basket. We were chatting when Cheng Haoqiang and Deng Xiyue arrived with their pitiful hauls. Zhao's face dropped when he saw their baskets, but he was about to be gracious about it. Before he could speak, Deng Xiyue beat him to it, pointing her finger at me and accusing me of deliberately abandoning them so I could hog all the herb-rich spots for myself. Cheng tried to shut her up. Zhao's expression turned to iron. I was about to respond, but Zhao handled it himself. He said the back mountain had no magical herb-filled zones. He'd been up there countless times. He also pointed out that my basket contained many different species that don't grow in the same area, which proved I'd been searching one plant at a time across a wide range.
There was no secret spot.
Deng Xiyue stammered that it was impossible for one person to gather that much in a single morning. Zhao cut her down. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean others can't. Instead of questioning your own ability, you accuse someone else. You call yourself an educated youth? You're an embarrassment to educated people. Then he dumped out her basket. More than half of what she'd collected was plain weeds. Of the actual herbs, most were gathered wrong. She'd brought back leaves when only roots were useful, and thrown away the seeds that were actually needed. Zhao asked her pointedly, hadn't she told the village chief she could recognize medicinal plants? She had no answer. Of course it had been a lie. She just wanted an easy assignment instead of fieldwork. That plan had backfired spectacularly. Zhao told her she was dismissed. She didn't need to come back in the afternoon, and he'd inform the village chief personally. She nearly passed out from rage. She pointed at me, demanding Zhao inspect my basket too. Maybe mine was full of weeds as well. Zhao shut that down instantly. I'd been gathering herbs for days before she ever showed up, and every single load had been perfect. He told her to leave. She wasn't welcome here. Her eyes went red, and she ran out. Cheng Haoqiang stood there awkwardly, glancing between me and her direction. Then he peeked at his own basket, and apparently realized his herbs probably weren't much better than hers. Before Zhao could dismiss him too, he quickly said he'd better go check on Deng Xiyue in case she did something rash and bolted. Just the two of us left. Zhao grumbled that they were all useless. I said it was expected. If they'd had any real skills, Zhao would have recruited them long ago. I checked Cheng's basket. Just as I suspected, barely anything usable in there either. While Zhao processed the herbs, I sat on the steps and brought up what I'd actually been thinking about. Old Zhao, the village children don't have to work, right? He said they were too small to be useful in the fields. I asked if they went to school. He said the nearest school was at Anyang Brigade headquarters, over 2 hours on foot. With everyone struggling to eat, nobody bothered sending their kids. Then I asked the real question, could I take those children with me to gather herbs on the mountain?
He was surprised.
They didn't know any herbs. I told him kids learn fast, and from what I'd seen, this group was sharp and obedient. Much better than bringing adults like Cheng and Deng who were lazy and dishonest. Zhao agreed in principle. The kids just ran around the village all day anyway. But he warned me, these weren't city children. Every family here was illiterate. These kids had never seen a book in their lives. If I couldn't teach them, I shouldn't let myself get frustrated. Old Zhao told me not to worry about the kids. They were tough enough to handle anything. His real concern was that they'd annoy me. I laughed. Since when was I the fragile one? I told him the kids would come by at noon and headed home with my little bucket of eels. I still had half an hour before the family came back from work, so I got started on lunch. The eels the kids gave me weren't enough for 8 people, so I pulled more eels and loaches from my space. I planned 4 dishes. crispy fried loach, coiled eel, braised eel for my grandparents who don't eat spicy food, and hand-torn cabbage. I got to work cleaning everything, a quick whack on the head to stun each eel, then slice it open, gut it, and cut it into pieces. Fast and clean. My mother came back early to help with the fire. She was surprised to see all the eels and loaches. I told her the village kids had given them as thanks for saving their friend. She accepted that without question and said the local children seemed sweet. She sat at our stone stove feeding wood into the fire while I cooked. When I dropped the loaches into hot oil and slammed the lid on, the sizzling almost startled her backward. But when the rich aroma hit, I could hear her stomach growl, though the crackling fire covered the sound and spared her the embarrassment. All 4 dishes were done in under half an hour. My mother kept staring at the food, trying to will the rest of the family to come home faster. Then Grandpa's voice called from outside. He walked toward us carefully, cradling a large leaf in both hands, face lit up with excitement. On the leaf sat a cluster of golden raspberries he'd found while cutting grass with Grandma. He'd picked them thinking I might like them. He held them out to me with such an eager expression that something twisted in my chest. I popped one in my mouth. Wild raspberries are nothing like the cultivated ones from supermarkets in my previous life. These were sour and sharp. But looking at the gentle old man's face, I somehow tasted something sweet. Delicious, I said. He beamed and handed me every last berry. Grandma smiled and told me he'd been so careful picking them, afraid to bruise a single one. He hadn't eaten a single berry himself the whole way home. He grumbled that he didn't like sour things. She said she couldn't eat sour food either, so it was perfect for me. My mother told me to keep them all as a snack, since treats of any kind were precious out here now. Then my brothers arrived. Xinyuan spotted the raspberries in my hands, grabbed one without asking, and tossed it in his mouth. His face immediately scrunched into a knot. That's sour, my mother smacked him. Those are your sisters. Your grandfather picked them specially for her, and you just help yourself without asking, my father glared. Wenba and Minxue stared him down. Xinyuan scratched his head sheepishly and apologized. I told him it was fine, there were plenty, and everyone should have some. No thanks, he said quickly, shuddering at the memory of that acid explosion. They're all yours. Everyone laughed at Xinyuan's reaction to the sour raspberries, and then we sat down to eat. The moment they saw the eels and loaches, they didn't need to be told twice. Xinyuan took one bite of the crispy loach and his eyes went wide. He couldn't believe how good it tasted. He remembered trying loach before in the capital and hating the muddy flavor. I explained that it's all about how you clean them. Done right, they're a real delicacy. And being wild-caught, these tasted nothing like the farm-raised ones from my previous life. Grandpa sipped the braised eel soup and said it warmed his whole stomach. Another meal where everyone ate until they were completely satisfied. Xinyuan leaned back, rubbing his belly, and called me the family's lucky star. Minxue gave him a look, and Wenba pulled rank as big brother, telling them to stop bickering and go wash the dishes before the afternoon work whistle. I don't nap, so I headed straight to the clinic. When I arrived, Huzi and his crew were already waiting outside the door. They'd wolfed down their cold, hard cornbread and come running. They were that eager to earn those white rabbit candies and finish whatever task I had for them. I brought them inside. The clinic felt cramped, with all those little bodies packed in. Old Zhao was drying herbs nearby and said nothing, but the kids stood ramrod straight. They were all a little afraid of him. His medicine tasted terrible. I stood in front of them and asked one question. Do you want white rabbit candy every single day? Every pair of eyes locked onto me. Huzi could barely believe his ears. I told them that as long as they completed my assignments, they'd get candy daily. I picked up a plant from a nearby tray and showed it to them. This is Banlongen. It's great for treating colds. Memorize what it looks like. I'm taking you up the mountain, and whenever you see one, dig it up. Bring back what I need, and you earn your candy. These kids had no idea what Banlongen meant in medical terms. All they understood was, find this plant, get candy. Their eyes lit up like lamps. Huzi asked to examine it closely, studied every detail, then passed it around to the older kids. When they were done, he carefully handed it back. Let's go dig, he declared, ready to charge out the door. I stopped him. I had more than one type of herb to teach them. I pulled out 5 or 6 different plants and explained each one carefully. It was their first day, so I kept it manageable. I told them to ask me if they found anything they weren't sure about. Then I laid down the rules. Stay together on the mountain, follow my commands, and absolutely no wandering off alone. Anyone who broke the rules would lose their candy privileges. Huzi thumped his chest and promised to keep everyone in line. I nodded, grabbed my basket, told Zhao we were heading out, and led my little army up the mountain. After we left, Zhao stood there slightly stunned. He'd been prepared to intimidate the kids into behaving. That's why he'd kept a stern face when they walked in. But I'd handled them effortlessly. They'd listened to my herb lesson with their ears practically standing on end. He chuckled to himself, muttering that he was getting old. Then he wondered if I actually had enough candy to keep this going. He decided that if I ran out, he'd find a way to help me restock. I'd barely stepped out of the clinic with my little troop when I saw Cheng Haoqiang rushing toward me. Cheng Haoqiang ran up to me as I was leaving the clinic with my little army. He asked where I was going and looked uncomfortable when he saw all the kids. He pointed out they were children who couldn't even read. How could they recognize herbs? They can't now. I'll teach them, I said flatly. I really don't like people like Cheng. All looks, no substance. He couldn't even keep up with me on a hike, yet he never stopped talking. I wanted to sew his mouth shut. I picked up my pace. Huzi and his crew fell right in behind me. These kids had been running wild on this mountain since they could crawl. They climbed faster and easier than Cheng, a grown man. He had to push himself hard just to not be embarrassed by a bunch of 6-year-olds. At the gathering spot, I split them into groups of 5, 1 basket per group. Whichever group collected the most would get an extra reward. That got them fired up instantly. Kids respond to incentives beautifully. I reminded them to stay nearby, no going into the deep forest, and to call for me immediately if anything happened. Huzi puffed out his chest and told me not to worry. They knew this mountain better than I did, and I was the one who should watch out for getting lost. I laughed and told him to keep his crew in line. I watched them divide up the work. No fighting, no fooling around. Everyone knew their role. Honestly, children execute better than adults sometimes. Give them the right motivation, and they'll surprise you every time. Cheng caught up and, seeing how organized everything was, wisely kept his head down and started hunting for herbs. He'd heard that Deng Xiue had been sent to the cornfields that afternoon by the village chief, punishment for her poor performance. The fields during harvest were like a steamer, blazing hot, with corn leaves sharp enough to slice your arms open. Cheng definitely didn't want that. With Deng's example fresh in his mind, he stopped slacking. He secretly watched what the kids were digging up and copied them. The quiet forest came alive with the children's energy. When the sun started setting, I called everyone back. They emerged looking like they'd been rolling in mud, but their eyes were sparkling. How did you all get this dirty? I asked. From digging, obviously, Huzi said, not understanding the question. Apparently, this was clean by their standards. I checked their baskets. Huzi's group had filled theirs past the halfway mark. The other 2 groups were about a third full. Not bad for a first day. I'd need to check the quality back at the clinic. Down at the clinic, old Zhao and I went through all 3 baskets carefully. Both our faces lit up. Every single one is a real medicinal plant, not a single weed, Zhao said, voice shaking with excitement. Huzi relaxed and lifted his chin proudly. It's not that hard. They're just plants. Miaomiao Jijia explained everything clearly. If we still got them wrong, we'd have wasted the 2 eyes on our faces. Don't get cocky just because I praised you, Zhao scolded, though his smile didn't fade. He admitted to me later that he hadn't expected much from this idea, but didn't want to discourage me. He never imagined the kids would deliver this kind of result. He wished he'd thought of using them years ago. I patted Huzi on the head. You did great. His little face turned bright red and he started stammering, quite a change from his confident speech 2 seconds earlier. Zhao checked Cheng's basket too. It was better than the morning haul, some weeds mixed in, but a clear improvement. Cheng looked relieved that he wasn't being fired alongside Deng Xiue. He said goodbye and practically ran out before Zhao could change his mind. He glanced at me as he passed, but I didn't look up. I turned to the kids and pulled 2 extra white rabbit candies from my pocket. These are the bonus for the winning group, I said, handing them to Huzi. His eyes blazed. We'll be here first thing tomorrow morning. He grabbed the candy and bolted off with his crew before I could say another word. Chung Haoqiang ran up to me as I was leaving the clinic with my little army. He asked where I was going and looked uncomfortable when he saw all the kids. He pointed out they were children who couldn't even read. How could they recognize herbs?
They can't now.
I'll teach them, I said flatly. I really don't like people like Chung. All looks, no substance. He couldn't even keep up with me on a hike, yet he never stopped talking. I wanted to sew his mouth shut. I picked up my pace. Huzi and his crew fell right in behind me. These kids had been running wild on this mountain since they could crawl. They climbed faster and easier than Chung, a grown man. He had to push himself hard just to not be embarrassed by a bunch of 6-year-olds. At the gathering spot, I split them into groups of 5, 1 basket per group. Whichever group collected the most would get an extra reward. That got them fired up instantly. Kids respond to incentives beautifully. I reminded them to stay nearby, no going into the deep forest, and to call for me immediately if anything happened. Huzi puffed out his chest and told me not to worry. They knew this mountain better than I did, and I was the one who should watch out for getting lost. I laughed and told him to keep his crew in line. I watched them divide up the work. No fighting, no fooling around. Everyone knew their role. Honestly, children execute better than adults sometimes. Give them the right motivation, and they'll surprise you every time. Chung caught up and, seeing how organized everything was, wisely kept his head down and started hunting for herbs. He'd heard that Deng Xiue had been sent to the cornfields that afternoon by the village chief, punishment for her poor performance. The fields during harvest were like a steamer, blazing hot, with corn leaves sharp enough to slice your arms open. Chung definitely didn't want that. With Deng's example fresh in his mind, he stopped slacking. He secretly watched what the kids were digging up and copied them. The quiet forest came alive with the children's energy. When the sun started setting, I called everyone back. They emerged looking like they'd been rolling in mud, but their eyes were sparkling. How did you all get this dirty? I asked. From digging, obviously, Huzi said, not understanding the question. Apparently, this was clean by their standards. I checked their baskets. Huzi's group had filled theirs past the halfway mark. The other 2 groups were about a third full. Not bad for a first day. I need to check the quality back at the clinic. Down at the clinic, old Zhao and I went through all 3 baskets carefully. Both our faces lit up. Every single one is a real medicinal plant, not a single weed, Zhao said, voice shaking with excitement. Huzi relaxed and lifted his chin proudly. It's not that hard. They're just plants. Miaomiao explained everything clearly. If we still got them wrong, we'd have wasted the 2 eyes on our faces. Don't get cocky just because I praised you, Zhao scolded, though his smile didn't fade. He admitted to me later that he hadn't expected much from this idea, but didn't want to discourage me. He never imagined the kids would deliver this kind of result. He wished he'd thought of using them years ago. I patted Huzi on the head. You did great. His little face turned bright red and he started stammering, quite a change from his confident speech 2 seconds earlier. Zhao checked Cheng's basket too. It was better than the morning haul, some weeds mixed in, but a clear improvement. Chung looked relieved that he wasn't being fired alongside Deng Xiue. He said goodbye and practically ran out before Zhao could change his mind. He glanced at me as he passed, but I didn't look up. I turned to the kids and pulled 2 extra white rabbit candies from my pocket. These are the bonus for the winning group, I said, handing them to Huzi.
His eyes blazed.
We'll be here first thing tomorrow morning. He grabbed the candy and bolted off with his crew before I could say another word. I'd wanted to teach the kids a few more herbs, but they'd already scattered, probably racing to divide up the candy. I didn't give them much on purpose. First, with our family status as reformed targets, being too generous would draw attention. Second, if I gave too much at once, they'd stop being motivated. What I gave matched half a day's work. Fair exchange. Old Zhao suggested I stop giving them candy and just have the village chief assign them work points instead. He felt sorry for me. So thin myself, yet sharing my sweets with children. I told him they were too skinny. He sighed and said that in this era, a year without starvation deaths was considered a good year. In previous years, people had died of hunger faster than graves could be dug. Looking at those bony little kids made something shift inside me. Living in the capital with old Sue, working at the state restaurant, I'd eaten meat almost every meal. I never truly understood how poor and desperate this era was until I came here and saw real village life. I used to just want a quiet, peaceful existence. But now that peace had been shattered anyway, maybe I could do more. Meanwhile, Huzi took his crew to their secret base, the old tree at the village entrance, and carefully counted out the candy. 7 pieces total. He set one aside for Gooden at the hospital. That left 6 for 15 kids. He worked it out. 3 kids share one candy, with the smallest ones splitting theirs between 2. Everyone agreed. Each child got one tiny bite and held it in their mouth, letting the milk flavor dissolve slowly. Nobody chewed. When it was gone, some kids licked the wrappers to chase the last bit of sweetness. One child asked Huzi if I was really a fairy sent from heaven to save them. Huzi answered without hesitation, "She is a fairy." The group unanimously decided to stick close to me from now on. Where there's a fairy, there's candy. They didn't know they'd become my loyal little followers. I was at home making dinner. I'd run out of excuses to pull meat from my space. So tonight was all vegetables, corn and flour flatbreads, sweet potato and caramel, spicy potatoes, and winter melon soup. I snuck in some lard for a bit of richness, but that was all. Nobody complained about the meatless meal. They understood this was normal. The previous days with meat had been the exception, all thanks to me. My cooking was good enough that even plain vegetables tasted satisfying. Still better than the cornbread and thin porridge the rest of the village survived on. I mentioned I'd find a way to buy more food soon. My mother immediately refused. She didn't want me spending money. I explained that the gifts the Hoare relatives had given me at our first meeting had been converted to cash at the county town, and the money would keep us going for a while. My father frowned, saying those gifts were meant for me personally. I told him objects sitting around were useless, better to turn them into food. My mother's eyes went red again. Both my parents looked at me with deep emotion, wondering what kind of hardship had shaped me into someone who always thought of others first. My father silently vowed that if the Hoare family ever regained its former glory, he'd give me the very best of everything this world had to offer. I had no idea they were all aching for me. My mind was already on my plans. Over the following days, I took the kids up the mountain every day to gather herbs. Each evening, I drew herb identification charts at home, then used them as teaching materials at the clinic the next morning. Within days, motivated by candy, the children had memorized most of the common medicinal plants. The clinic's herb shortage was finally solved. And so, on the morning of June 17th, one day before my rendezvous, I loaded up a big batch of processed herbs, climbed onto a donkey cart, and set off toward Emo City, rattling along the road. Old Zhao drove me to the county bus station and handed me my introduction letter, basically this era's version of an ID. He told me I had 4 days, and I absolutely had to be back by the evening of the 20th. He fussed over me like a grandfather sending off a grandchild, reminding me to sell the herbs if I could, but not to force it. I told him not to worry, and waved goodbye. The bus to Emo City took 4 hours. It was packed, bumpy, and smelled terrible. I nearly got carsick. I thought about how nice it would be to have my own vehicle, but quickly dropped the idea. Even if I could afford one, nobody would sell a car to a reformed target. We needed to get that label removed from our family somehow. Otherwise, we couldn't eat openly, couldn't dress well, couldn't do anything without attracting suspicion. I touched the letter in my pocket, the one from Lu Shuyun. If what he told me was true, and I completed this mission successfully, it might create an opportunity to change our family's situation. That was the real reason for this trip. The herb selling was just a cover to get the village chief to issue me the travel papers. We arrived at Emo City just before dark. I found a guest house, showed my introduction letter, and got a tiny room with a single bed and a bathroom. After washing off the smell from the bus, I lay down and felt every cell in my body relax. This was a real bed. Our straw mat back home was barely better than sleeping on bare ground. I started mentally planning renovations, proper beds, a real kitchen, a walled courtyard for growing vegetables, and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, June 18th, I asked the guest house owner for directions to the South Mountain Church and headed over. The doors weren't open yet, so I found a nearby breakfast stall and ordered a bowl of noodles. At 9, the church opened. I didn't rush in. I watched from across the street. Then I saw him, a man in a black hat with a small white flower pinned to his chest, walking calmly through the doors. I paid my bill, grabbed my bag of herbs, and went inside. A foreign priest was praying at the pulpit. The pews were filled with people listening intently. I scanned the entire church. Only one person matched the description. I slid quietly into the seat beside him, folded my hands, and pretended to pray like everyone else. The man didn't pay me any attention. His intel said the contact would be male. After a moment, I whispered, "What time is it?" No response. He probably thought he was hearing things, or that some random girl had coincidentally said words that matched his code phrase. There was no way command would send a young woman on something this dangerous. I frowned. Had I picked the wrong person? But he was the only one in the whole church wearing a black hat with a white flower. I decided to try once more. "What time is it?" This time he heard me clearly. He hesitated, clearly torn, then decided to test back. "Dawn is coming." My eyes lit up. That was the countersign. He realized then that I was indeed his contact. I immediately pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. He tucked it away swiftly and turned to ask me something, but I was already walking out with my bag. He wanted to follow, but with classified material on him, he couldn't risk it. He had to report back first. Outside, I confirmed nobody was tailing me, then relaxed and strolled along the streets. The city was much livelier than the county. I even spotted private cars driving by. I stared at them longingly. Someday. I found several herb shops along the road, but didn't just walk into any of them. I picked one with moderate foot traffic, carried my bag inside, and set it on the counter. "Seeing a doctor or picking up medicine?" the man behind the counter asked. "Do you buy medicinal herbs?" I asked. His friendly expression cooled. "You have some?" "I do." I lifted my bag onto the counter. "They've all been properly processed." The herb shop owner inspected my herbs carefully. They were common varieties, but well-processed and good quality. He asked for my introduction letter, checked it over, and then offered me 5 yuan for the whole bag. He said his shop wasn't short on common herbs, but since I'd traveled so far, he'd take them. I looked at that big sack, days of work for me and the kids, and it was only worth 5 yuan. It felt like a loss. But I also knew that back in the village, people would cry tears of joy over 5 yuan. Most families couldn't save that much in an entire year. At this rate, we could earn 20 yuan a month, equal to a worker's full salary. So, I agreed without haggling. Then I casually asked if he bought finished medicine products too. His eyebrow went up. I told him my family had a medical background, and I'd learned to make a special ointment for treating bruises and injuries. I pulled a sample from my pocket and handed it over. He clearly expected nothing from a young girl, but the moment he smelled it, his expression changed completely. He identified the base formula, golden yellow powder, but then frowned. There were 2 extra ingredients he couldn't place. I told him it was my improved version, more effective than the standard recipe. He pressed me for the secret ingredients. I smiled and said it was a family secret. He let it go. I offered him the sample for free. He could test it on someone, and I'd come back tomorrow afternoon. If it worked well, we could discuss a deal. He agreed. He had nothing to lose. Either he'd gain a powerful new product for his shop, or he'd gotten a free ointment. I left satisfied. Meanwhile, the man from the church had delivered Lu Shuyuan's letter to his superiors. They verified the envelope hadn't been tampered with, then sent it to Mo City Industrial University. Within half an hour, confirmation came back. The contents were authentic. The bureau chief, a man named Li, ordered the black hat man to find me and bring me in. "Be polite about it," he stressed. I was back at the guest house, writing something at the desk when a knock came. I opened the door and recognized the man from the church, without his hat and flower now, looking more relaxed. He politely asked me to come with him. I said yes and walked out without a single question. He seemed stunned by how calm I was. No nervousness, no hesitation, no asking where we were going. But then he figured that a girl brave enough to make a solo intelligence handoff probably wasn't the type to get scared easily. Outside, a car was waiting. My eyebrow went up. I couldn't buy a car, but I could at least enjoy riding in one. The seats only strengthened my desire to own one someday. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to an imposing government building. The man opened my door, and I followed him upstairs to an office. I glanced at the nameplate on the door. Bureau Chief's office. A spark lit up deep in my eyes. Lu Xiuyuan hadn't lied. That letter really was important. The man knocked. A commanding voice said, "Enter." We walked in. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, wearing a mouse suit, radiating authority, without saying a word. His eyes locked directly onto me. I walked straight up to the bureau chief without hesitation. "Good day, Director." He seemed amused by my composure. "Aren't you scared? You brought me to a government office, not a prison. What's there to be afraid of?" I said calmly. He chuckled and called me clever, then got serious. He had questions and wanted honest answers. I told him everything. How I'd found Lu Xiuyuan on the mountain covered in blood, how he'd given me the letter, how he said people were chasing him and he'd lead them away alone. I told him Lu Xiuyuan's name and that I didn't know where he was now. Director Li's face fell when he heard all this. The entire squad sent on that secret mission had gone silent. This was the first lead, and it wasn't good news. Those were heroes. He swallowed his emotions and looked at me steadily. He confirmed my name and told me I'd done the organization a great service. He'd already applied for an official reward, and news would come soon. This was what I'd been hoping for, but I needed to make sure. I mentioned, with carefully faked hesitation, that my family had been sent down for reform. He wasn't fazed at all, which told me he'd already looked into my background. He said it didn't matter. Being sent for reform and then earning merit was exactly what reform through labor was supposed to achieve. I pressed once more. Would the reward really come through despite our status? He answered firmly that the organization never overlooked merit, just as it never excused wrongdoing. Punishment for mistakes, rewards for achievements. Always. I smiled wide. "Thank you, Director." He smiled back and told his man to see me out. The black hat man drove me to the guest house and offered to pick me up when I left. I declined, told him they were important people doing important work and shouldn't waste time on ordinary citizens like me. Then I hopped out and ran inside. The truth was less noble. I still had shopping to do in the city, and having government escorts would make that very inconvenient. I stayed in my room the rest of that day and didn't go out until noon the next day, checking out of the guest house on my way. I headed straight for the herb shop. I could see the owner standing outside his door, craning his neck, looking up and down the street. The moment I appeared, his face lit up like the sun. He practically dragged me inside and poured me tea himself. "So you tested the ointment," I said, sipping slowly. He could barely contain himself. He'd tried it on a patient yesterday. Within 5 minutes, the pain had decreased significantly. This morning, the patient could already put weight on his injured foot. He wanted to buy every last bit I had. I told him I only had the one sample. His face crumbled. Then he recovered. If I'd made one, I could make more. He asked my price per batch. I had a better idea. Making ointment was time-consuming and finding the herbs was difficult. Instead, I offered to sell him the formula itself. He nearly fell off his chair. In the medical world, improved family recipes were treasures passed down through generations, never sold unless absolutely desperate. He couldn't believe his luck. I held up 2 fingers. "I have 2 conditions." "2?" I'd agree to 20. First, I needed him to purchase a list of medicines for me. I handed over a pre-written list. Mostly Western medicines his shop didn't carry, but he had connections and said he could manage it. Second, the ointment had to carry my name. That made him hesitate. He'd been planning to rebrand it as his own family's secret recipe. But I held firm. These were my terms before we could discuss pricing. He wrestled with it, then agreed through gritted teeth. But he added one condition of his own. I could never sell the formula to any other shop. No problem. I agreed without hesitation. He couldn't sell the formula to anyone else? That was fine. I had plenty more recipes where that came from. He asked my price. I held up one finger. 1,000 yuan. His face fell instantly. He said it was too high. I broke it down for him like a businesswoman. The ointment's effects spoke for themselves. Even at 2 yuan per patch, customers would be fighting to buy it. Manufacturing cost? I could keep it to 60 cents per patch, meaning a profit of 1.40 yuan each. He'd recoup the 1,000 in under 800 patches, and everything after that was pure profit forever. A good formula can last generations. I added, with a pained look, that I'd never sell a family heirloom if we weren't in such dire straits. He thought about that miraculous ointment, gritted his teeth, and stamped his foot.
Fine.
1,000. But he wanted me to make a fresh batch in front of him first, to confirm it matched the sample. I agreed, but payment first. He hesitated, so I pointed out the obvious. This was his turf. I was one small girl, and his brother-in-law was a police squad leader. If I tried anything, I'd never make it out the door. He laughed, went to the back, and returned with a fat envelope. I counted every bill, exactly 1,000, not a single yuan short. I handed over the formula. His eyes lit up when he saw the 2 secret ingredients. He muttered that the person who'd modified this recipe was a genius. 2 common, cheap herbs that multiplied the medicine's effectiveness several times over. He asked once more if I was really willing to part with it. I told him the money was in my pocket, no takebacks. Then I demonstrated the entire manufacturing process right in front of him, pointing out every critical step. He watched so intently, he probably wished he could record me. In under half an hour, I'd produced a fresh patch identical to the original. He sniffed it thoroughly and confirmed it was perfect. I reminded him about my medicine list. He apologized, he'd nearly forgotten. Since they were common Western medicines and the quantities were small, he estimated 2 hours. I told him I'd be back. He walked me to the door personally. I spent those 2 hours at the city's supply cooperative, which was much bigger than the county one. I went on a shopping spree. Rice, flour, oil, every kind of meat I could find, plus several boxes of candy for the kids. Other customers backed away from me, intimidated by my spending. I blew several hundred yuan in one go and left the staff stunned. I found an empty alley, loaded everything into my space, and slipped out through a different exit. Nobody noticed a thing. With the remaining money, I went to the department store. Winter was coming fast in Mo City. In a couple months, temperatures would drop to -30 or 40 degrees. Without proper gear, you wouldn't survive a single night. I bought 2 of the thickest down comforters they had. Several hundred yuan, gone in an instant. But worth every cent, these blankets would get us through winter. In the modern era, the same quality would cost over 10,000. After that, I left the store quickly. Window shopping with no money left would just be torture. I stashed the comforters in my space and headed back to the herb shop. The owner beamed the moment he saw me. My medicines had just arrived. While waiting, he'd even tried making a batch of ointment himself and confirmed it matched mine perfectly. He was already planning to bring in apprentices tomorrow and start selling by afternoon. I checked the medicines the shop owner had gotten for me. Everything matched my list perfectly, neatly packed. I thanked him, and he waved it off. He should be the one thanking me for such a valuable formula. Before leaving, I told him to name the ointment Miaomiao Pain Relief Ointment and print product of Shima Village, Mo City on the packaging. He asked if that was my hometown. I said I lived there now. He agreed easily. The name was already settled, so an address was no big deal. As I stepped out the door, he called after me. If you ever have other formulas to sell, come to me first. I said I would and left. I headed straight to the bus station and caught the last bus back to the county. Meanwhile, back at the bureau, Director Li received a phone call. From what I'd later pieced together, they'd found Lu Xiuyuan alive. Li rushed to the city hospital. Lu Xiuyuan had just come out of surgery, skeletal and barely clinging to life, monitors beeping beside him. The doctor said they'd stabilized him but couldn't promise how well he'd recover. His injuries were too severe. They'd have to wait until he woke up. The doctor also mentioned that Lu Xiuyuan was remarkably lucky. He'd had century-old ginseng slices on him that had kept him alive. Without them, he'd have been long dead. Li assumed the ginseng was something Lu Xiuyuan had carried himself, given his background. He didn't connect it to me. He ordered his people to notify the capital about Lu Xiuyuan's status. Back on my end, I arrived at the county after dark. I'd expected to spend the night there, but the moment I stepped out of the station, I spotted Shania with his donkey cart. What luck. He was surprised to see me too. He explained he'd come to pick up Gooden from a hospital. The boy was being discharged. The doctors said he was out of danger and could recover at home. I suspected Gooden wasn't fully healed. More likely the family simply couldn't afford to keep him in the hospital any longer. Every day cost money they didn't have. I asked if it was okay for me to hitch a ride. Shania practically tripped over himself saying yes. Even 3 more passengers would fit. He was clearly just happy for an excuse to spend time around me, though he knew a girl like me was out of his league. We drove to the hospital and found Gooden and his mother waiting outside. She spotted me and her eyes lit up with gratitude. She grabbed Gooden and tried to get them both on their knees to kowtow. I stopped them immediately. Gooden was still injured and shouldn't be making big movements. I told them to get on the cart so we could head home. She held my hands and poured out a stream of thank yous that seemed like it would never end. I can handle hostility without flinching, but genuine gratitude always leaves me helpless. I redirected the conversation to Gooden, asking about his condition, partly out of concern, partly to stop the waterfall of thanks. Gooden's mother admitted they simply had no money left. I'd guessed as much. I sighed inwardly and told her to bring Gooden to the clinic every day so I could change his dressings. If the wound got infected from improper care, it could kill him. She tried to kneel again. I held her up and reminded her the herbs were public resources from the mountain. She didn't owe me anything. But she understood the truth. The herbs were free, but the skill to use them wasn't. Gooden himself hadn't said a word since getting on the cart. He sat curled up, one hand covering his injured eye, trying to hide it. He was even thinner than when I'd first seen him. Losing an eye like that, even adults struggle to cope with something so devastating. For a child, it was crushing. I have more patience with children, so I spoke up. I told him that back in the capital, I'd heard about artificial eyes. They looked so realistic that nobody could tell they were fake unless you told them. He lifted his head instantly, a spark of hope in his good eye. His mother sighed and said something like that was surely too expensive. She was grateful just to have her son alive. Being blind in one eye was better than being dead. The light in Gooden's eye flickered out. I said it wasn't as expensive as she might think, and by the time Gooden grew up, the price would probably drop even more. I wasn't lying. In the future, not just artificial eyes but prosthetic limbs would become affordable for most families. His mother gave a half-hearted, hopefully, not really believing it. But I noticed a faint glow return to Gooden's eye. People are resilient creatures. They don't fear hardship or disaster. What they truly fear is having no hope at all. As long as there's hope, even someone with a broken body can crawl forward step by step. I hoped my words planted a seed in that boy's heart. The donkey cart rattled all the way back to the village under a bright moon. It was well past midnight when we arrived. I said goodbye to Shania and Gooden's family at the old tree and headed home. Since it was dark and nobody was around, I started pulling things from my space as I walked, steaming meat buns, white rice, white flour, milk powder, and nutritional supplements for the elderly, and various meats. By the time I reached our door, the bag was bursting. Everyone was asleep. No electricity, no entertainment. They always turned in early. But I must have made some noise, because my father woke up and nudged Wenba. I think there's something outside. They each grabbed a wooden stick and crept to the door, thinking someone might be trying to steal the water buffalo. Instead, they found me standing there loaded down with bags. Dad? Big brother? Why are you up? I was more surprised than they were. My father dropped his stick immediately. Wenba tossed his into the shadows. I explained that I'd finished early and caught a ride back with Shania. Help me carry these inside, I said. My mother appeared next, checking me over head to toe before exhaling with relief that I wasn't hurt. Then Xinyuan came out. Then everyone else. The whole family was awake now.
Fine.
Might as well distribute everything while they were all here. I set the biggest bag down in the moonlight and started pulling things out. A bag of white rice. Their faces stayed calm. A bag of white flour, still manageable. A big slab of pork. Okay, they knew I loved meat. A huge bag of spare ribs. Expressions starting to crack. All of this had to cost over 10 yuan, right? But I kept going. Malted milk powder. Powdered milk. Brown sugar.
Eggs.
More and more food piling up into a small mountain. And my hands still weren't stopping. My mother finally couldn't hold it in.
Miaomiao.
Did you go rob someone? Rob someone? No, I bought everything at the supply cooperative in the city, I said, shaking my head. Then I told Wenba to open his bundle. Inside were thick padded cotton coats for everyone. And my father's package held 2 down comforters, clean, soft, and warm. My mother recognized instantly that those comforters were expensive. Even in the capital, not everyone could afford them. The mood shifted. Everyone looked serious. My father's voice went stern. Miaomiao, you didn't spend the village's money on all this, did you? I almost laughed. He thought I'd use the herb-selling profits to buy supplies for our family. I told him of course not. Did he really think I was that kind of person? He said he believed in me, but even selling all the family gifts couldn't have covered this much. Before he could finish, my mother punched him. How dare you question our daughter? Everything she bought is for us. If there's trouble, I'll take the blame. Wenba stepped in. Mom won't need to. We brothers will handle it. The twins echoed him. Then Grandpa and Grandma stood up too, saying if anyone needed to take responsibility, it should be the old folks who'd already lived full lives. I watched my entire family fighting over who would take the fall for crimes I hadn't committed. It was almost absurd. I had to explain quickly before someone marched off to confess to the village chief. The village money is untouched. I paid for everything myself. They all stared. Where would I get this kind of money? I told them my adoptive father had been an unmarried butcher with no other family. Before he died, he'd left me a large sum as a dowry. That's what I'd spent. It was a rare trip to the city, so I'd stocked up. Your dowry? You spent your dowry money. My mother's voice shot up, and the tears started falling again. She turned away, trying to hide them with her sleeve. I told her not to worry. I had no plans to get married anytime soon, and when the day eventually came, I was sure they'd prepare a dowry for me. That was purely to comfort her. In 2 lifetimes, I've never once considered marriage. That only made her cry harder. My father tried to comfort her, but she shoved him away. This is your fault. Our daughter spent her dowry to take care of us, and you questioned her. He was drowning in guilt. I smiled at him and said I understood. He just didn't want me going down the wrong path. That made him feel even worse. With everything out in the open, I distributed the rest. I'd bought each person a plain cotton coat. Nothing flashy, since we were reformed targets and couldn't afford to stand out. My mother held hers to her chest, eyes glistening. My father could only repeat, good, good, good. My grandparents and brothers each got one too. Everyone's eyes were red. The comforters were stored away for winter. All the food went to my room, since I was the cook. Nobody argued. I sent everyone back to bed, except for me, exhausted from a full day of travel. None of them slept that night. My father apparently spent the whole night running his hands over his new coat. I slept deeply. After weeks of living together, I could finally relax enough to sleep soundly next to my mother and grandmother. When I woke, the sun was already high, and everyone had left for work without waking me. I was annoyed at myself. My guard was dropping too much. I ate the corn porridge my mother had left warming on the stove and headed to the clinic. Old Zhao was carrying herbs outside to dry. When he saw me, he did a double take. Am I losing my mind? He muttered, then went right back to his herbs as if I were a hallucination. Grandpa Zhao, I called out half laughing. He looked up, startled, then broke into a grin when he realized I was actually standing there. He was surprised I was back early. He'd expected me to arrive by afternoon at the earliest. I explained I'd finished my business quickly and caught a ride back last night. He seemed impressed that a city girl like me hadn't stayed to sightsee. I handed him 5 yuan. This is what I earned selling the herbs. His cloudy old eyes went bright. He'd expected 2 yuan at most. I told him city prices were higher than the county. That's why I'd insisted on going to Mo City. Then I handed him the bag of medicines I'd gotten from the shop owner. He was still reeling from the 5 yuan when the second blow hit. Where did all these medicines come from? How much did you actually sell those herbs for? I told him the herbs had paid for both the 5 yuan and the medicines. Technically true. The medicines were part of the deal for selling the formula, which I'd gotten for free. But I wanted to let the old man be happy, and more importantly, I needed them to see real, tangible profits. That was essential for my next moves. Zhao grabbed the money, scooped up the medicine bag, seized my arm, and practically dragged me to the village chief's house. He was already calculating the business potential. I told him to slow down before he tripped. At Wang's house, Zhao barged in without knocking, shouting for Wang. No answer from the main room. I said the chief might not be home, but Zhao pushed into the inner room anyway. Wang was sitting on his bed, smoking his pipe, staring at a little notebook with a deeply troubled expression. Zhao scolded him for not answering, and Wang apologized. He'd been lost in thought. Zhao asked what was wrong. Wang hesitated, then opened up. He'd just delivered the village's grain quota to the brigade. This year they'd actually managed to pay in full for the first time in 3 years, since the brigade had refused to let them borrow anymore. But paying the full quota had emptied the village granary. There wasn't enough left to distribute to villagers for winter. Shima village's winters were brutal. Without grain reserves, half the village might not survive until spring. Wang had been sitting there for days, unable to eat or sleep, trying to figure out a solution. His only idea was to go beg the brigade for a grain loan. Again, with no guarantee they'd say yes. Zhao sighed sympathetically. People thought being village chief was prestigious, but nobody saw the impossible weight on Wang's shoulders, satisfying the government's demands on one side, keeping villagers alive on the other, all during years of poor harvests. Wang's hair had gone white from the stress. Then Zhao slapped his own forehead. I almost forgot why I came. He set the medicine bag and the 5 yuan in front of Wang. Wang's jaw dropped, the exact same reaction Zhao had had. Zhao called me inside. Wang looked at me and immediately understood. Zhao laid it all out. I'd sold the herbs we'd gathered in under 7 days. They'd yielded 5 yuan plus all these medicines. He did the math on the spot. At this rate, with our current workforce, we could earn roughly 20 yuan per week just from herbs. 20 yuan, Wang's voice cracked. Old Zhao tempered his excitement a little, acknowledging that this first batch may have sold well because the shop happened to need those particular herbs. Future prices might dip, but even conservatively, we'd still earn 2 or 3 yuan per trip. With autumn harvest over and villagers preparing for winter, if we could mobilize everyone to gather herbs, process them properly, and sell them in the city, we might actually survive the winter. Wang stared at me, barely daring to believe it. You really earned this from selling village herbs? I told him I wouldn't joke about something like this. I could see hope flicker in his eyes. He started doing the math. If a handful of kids earned 5 yuan in a week, the whole village working together could easily double that. 2 months until winter meant possibly 100 yuan. That could keep the entire village alive. His fingers were trembling, but then worry crept back. He asked if I could guarantee the herb shops would keep buying. I told him firmly that medicinal herbs were always in demand. As long as we maintained quality, there'd always be buyers. And if worst came to worst, I had backup plans. I could always dangle another formula in front of the shop owner, conditional on him purchasing our village's herbs. I'd heard everything Wang said about the grain shortage. If nothing changed, half the village wouldn't make it through winter. I kept thinking about those hollow-eyed old people sitting outside their doors, and those children who licked candy wrappers clean. I wanted to help them, and helping them would help my family too. We needed goodwill and standing in this village. The Hua family were smart, capable people who shouldn't spend their lives picking corn. I needed to build up influence here to support my future plans. Wang's gloom vanished. He jumped off his bed and headed straight for the village loudspeaker. Within minutes, his voice was booming across Shima village. Emergency meeting at the old tree. Everyone must attend. No exceptions. He repeated it 3 times. Villagers grabbed their little stools and fans and hurried over. I walked there with Wang and Zhao. By the time we arrived, everyone was already gathered, chatting in small groups. They assumed this was about grain distribution and looked cheerful. But when they noticed me and Zhao flanking the village chief, some of the sharper ones sensed something bigger was coming. Wang stood before the crowd, a sea of gaunt, yellow-skinned, skeletal faces, and called for silence. 2 announcements. First, as many of you guessed, we've paid our full grain quota to the brigade this year. Brief cheers. Then the hammer fell. However, after paying the quota, there isn't enough grain left in our reserves for everyone to get through winter. The crowd erupted. People shouted from every direction, a bedridden mother waiting for grain, a daughter-in-law so starved she'd stopped producing milk, a baby too weak to even cry anymore. This was a death sentence. Wang had known this reaction was coming. That's why he'd locked himself in his house for 2 days after delivering the quota. He couldn't face them. But now he had my good news. He raised his hand and shouted for silence. I'm working on a solution. The crowd settled slightly. Their village chief wouldn't just let them starve. Wang pulled out the 5 yuan. Do you know what this is? Someone said, Village chief, we're not stupid, that's money. Do you know where it came from? Our comrade Su Miaomiao led the village children to gather medicinal herbs and sold them. This is 1 week's earnings. The crowd erupted again, this time in shock. They all knew their kids had been running around the mountains with me, digging up grassroots for candy. Nobody had paid much attention, but earning actual money? 1 week. 5 yuan? That's incredible. Someone with a quick mind guessed Wang's plan. You want all of us to go gather herbs? Wang's voice rang out. Exactly. We have 2 months before winter. If we spend that time gathering herbs, selling them in the city, and using the money to buy winter supplies, we won't have to freeze or starve this year. Let's go dig right now. The villagers jumped to their feet, ready to charge up the mountain the second they heard herbs meant money. Wang stopped them cold. Do any of you even know what medicinal herbs look like? Do you know how to dig them properly? That shut everyone up. These were people who couldn't read a single character, let alone identify plants with medical value. If they picked something poisonous and someone got sick, they'd end up in prison. Once they'd calmed down, Wang explained that before anyone could set foot on the mountain, they'd need to pass my training on herb identification. Only those who could recognize the plants would earn the right to go. This was my idea. I'd told Wang beforehand that if we just let everyone loose on the mountain without knowledge, they'd destroy the forest and come back with nothing useful. He'd been impressed by how far ahead I was thinking. Some villagers got nervous. They couldn't read, so how could they learn? I stepped forward and told them to relax. This wasn't about reading or writing. If they could tell wheat from corn from peanuts, they could learn herbs. After all, if little children could master this, grown adults certainly could. That restored their confidence. I organized them into groups of 10, each group picking their own leader. The leaders would learn from old Zhao directly, then teach their teams. Huzi and his little crew served as assistants, and when adults saw these kids rattling off herb names and characteristics with perfect accuracy, nobody dared underestimate the training again. Wang watched the whole scene and looked like he might cry, but he swallowed it down to save face. I was actually the least busy person there, until I heard my mother's voice behind me. The entire her family was standing there, looking a bit lost. Nobody had been willing to group with them. Their reform target status scared people off. My mother sighed about it, but I wasn't upset with the villagers. Shima village was actually remarkably kind compared to what reform targets faced elsewhere. I'd heard stories of abuse and persecution so severe that people took their own lives. Here, they simply kept their distance. That was its own form of decency. Still, the isolation was inconvenient for my plans. I hoped the government reward would come through soon. Official recognition would change everything. We formed our own family group, and I taught them personally. I had to hand it to the Hu family genes. Every single one of them, from grandparents to brothers, had incredible learning ability. I barely needed to explain each herb once before they had it memorized. People this talented shouldn't be wasting away picking corn. They belonged somewhere they could truly shine. I reminded myself to move faster with my plans. Our group progressed the fastest. That same afternoon, I took them and Huzi's kids up the mountain. Everyone came back with full baskets. The other villagers watched with envy. knowing that when the herbs were sold and grain purchased, distribution would be based on contribution. More herbs meant more food. Their studying intensified. That night, nearly every household lit their precious kerosene lamps, a rare extravagance, and the entire village stayed up studying herbs by lamplight. Within 3 days, all 33 groups had passed the certification exam from Zhao and me. But more gatherers meant we needed more people for processing. Herb preparation was delicate work. Wrong techniques would ruin the medicine's effectiveness. Only Zhao and I could handle that, so the drying stations needed staffing. I thought of those old people who sat at their doorsteps every day with empty, lifeless eyes. I suggested to Zhao that we recruit them for the drying work. The moment those elderly villagers heard they could be useful, their aches and pains vanished. They threw themselves into the work with incredible energy. The entire village was mobilized. Practically every person, from the very old to the very young, had a role. It was livelier than harvest season had ever been. The whole village effort produced incredible results. Within 3 days, the clinic was overflowing with raw herbs. Zhao and I were processing them nearly around the clock. I realized if we kept this pace, we'd both drop dead from exhaustion. I decided to train 5 people in herb preparation. Family first. I chose my mother since working at home processing herbs was easier than climbing mountains. She accepted happily. Then I picked 2 villagers and 2 educated youth, including Cheng Haoqiang. He'd been gathering herbs with the kids for a while and knew the workflow. Deng Xiyue was furious that Cheng got selected and she didn't. She convinced herself I was jealous of her educated youth status. She vowed to report me and make me pay. Nobody noticed the venom in her eyes. Cheng turned out to be the fastest learner of the 5, even if he was a bit pretentious. My mother was the slowest. Her natural elegance made every movement graceful but unhurried. Still, her finished products had the best quality, so I let her work at her own pace. With the extra help, I could finally breathe. The village kept at it for a full month. The clinic was stacked with processed herbs, and Wang had been dropping hints about selling. I knew what was bothering him. He was terrified that all this work would be for nothing if we couldn't find a buyer. And since everyone had been eating more from the harder labor, a failed sale would be a double loss. I'd wanted to accumulate more before making the trip, but I couldn't let morale slip. Wang and Shania would come with me this time since there was too much to carry alone. The villagers gathered at the village entrance to see us off, eyes full of desperate hope. This trip would determine whether they survived winter. Wang put on his tough leader act and warned everyone not to slack off while he was gone. My mother reminded me to be careful. Then Shania cracked the whip, and we rolled away. After the familiar county-to-city bus journey, we arrived in Mo City by evening. Wang was visibly nervous. He'd barely been to the county, let alone the city. When he saw cars on the road, he froze, clutching his bags like a lifeline. Shania, being younger, was just wide-eyed with curiosity. I led them straight to my herb shop. The place had transformed. It was packed with customers, 10 times busier than my first visit. My ointment formula had clearly worked wonders for the owner's business. 1 month, and he'd turned a dying shop into a thriving one. Smart businessman. I started to walk in, but Wang grabbed my sleeve, whispering nervously that maybe we should wait until closing time so we wouldn't get thrown out. Seeing this man, the same age as my father, the leader of an entire village, so timid and careful in the city, stirred something inside me. Life was just too hard for ordinary people in this era. I smiled and told him the owner was a friend of mine. Something about my calm expression settled his nerves. He straightened up, grabbed his bags, and followed me in. The owner was buried in his ledger, too busy to look up. He told me to take a number and wait. Then I spoke, and his head snapped up. The moment he recognized me, his face broke into a massive grin. "It's you. You have no idea. That formula of yours has brought me more business in 1 month than I used to get in an entire year. I can tell," I said, looking around at the bustling shop. His eyes sparkled. "So, what brings you back? Don't tell me you have another formula to sell me." "I'm here to sell herbs," I said politely. "Our village has processed quite a batch. Are you still buying?" I made sure not to act entitled just because my formula had revived his business. The owner noticed, and it clearly pleased him. He waved his hand grandly. Of course I'm buying. And I'll give you the highest market price. His shop was burning through supplies with all the new business, so having me deliver herbs directly saved him the trouble of sourcing elsewhere. I turned and waved Wang and Shania over. Wang had been watching nervously from the doorway, expecting me to get thrown out. Instead, he'd seen the owner greet me like a VIP. He was stunned. They set the bags on the counter. The owner inspected everything, nodded approvingly, and said our herbs were better processed than anything he'd been buying from other suppliers. He'd take it all. He called over an assistant to weigh and inventory everything. Wang and Shania couldn't believe he was buying the entire lot without hesitation. They'd prepared themselves for going door to door, shop to shop. The owner ran his abacus, clicking away while Wang and Shania stared without blinking. Your total comes to 198.20 yuan. Since we're friends, let's call it an even 200. I accepted calmly. That formula I'd sold him was earning him far more than 2 yuan. This was a fair gesture, not charity. Wang and Shania, on the other hand, looked like their eyes might fall out. 200 yuan? Their entire village worked the fields all year long, treating every crop like a precious ancestor, and couldn't earn 200 yuan. Yet 1 month of herb gathering had done it. Village chief.
Pinch me.
Am I dreaming? Shania whispered. I need someone to pinch me too, Wang murmured. The owner handed me the cash with a grin. I didn't count it. I told him I trusted him. He was delighted and insisted I bring all future herbs directly to him. He walked me to the door personally, which turned heads. Since the pain relief ointment had taken off, the owner had become quite important. Nobody had seen him escort a customer out like this before, especially a young girl. After we left, Wang finally asked me if those herbs really sold for 200 yuan. I handed him the envelope and said he could count it himself. He reached for the bills, then noticed all the people on the street and quickly stuffed the envelope inside his undershirt. Too many people here. Let's find somewhere private. I took them to the guest house I'd stayed at before and asked for 2 rooms. But the moment I said 2, Wang cut in. 1. 1 is fine. The owner gave us a very suspicious look, clearly getting the wrong idea. Wang quickly clarified that only I would be staying. He and Shania would sleep outside somewhere. I told him absolutely not. Temperatures were dropping fast, and sleeping on the street would make them sick. He started to argue, so I leaned in and whispered, We're carrying that much cash. What if someone steals it while you're sleeping on a bench? That did it. Wang's whole body went rigid with alarm. As much as it pained him to spend the money, that envelope held his entire village's hope for winter. He couldn't risk it over a few yuan.
Fine.
2 rooms, he said, looking at the guesthouse owner with an expression like someone was pulling out his teeth. Back in the guesthouse room, Wang took a deep breath and pulled the warm envelope from inside his shirt. He wiped his hands clean on his clothes before carefully counting the bills.
10, 20,
100, 200. By the end, his fingers were shaking and his eyes were red. There really is 200 yuan, his voice cracked.
Yes.
200, I confirmed. Something about his emotion got to me. My chest felt tight. With this money, we can buy grain for winter. Nobody will starve. He clutched those bills like they were made of life itself. Then he dropped to his knees in front of me. Shania immediately followed. I tried to pull them up, but Wang pushed my hands away. You've only been in our village 2 months, he said, eyes glistening. You don't know what it's been like. I've been village chief for 20 years. Every single day, I've tried to figure out how to keep my people fed and warm. 20 years and I never managed it. But you did it in 1 month. You accomplished what I couldn't in a lifetime. He said he was just an old farmer who didn't know fancy words and asked me to please accept this gesture of respect, not just from him, but from every person in Shima village. I didn't know what to do. Under his pleading gaze, I slowly pulled my hands back and let him bow. His forehead hit the floor with a heavy thud. Shania's followed, banging loudly. After 1 full kowtow, I hauled them both up and told them if they kept going, they'd be shortening my life rather than thanking me. After they left, I lay in that narrow guest house bed thinking about what Wang had said and that deep bow he'd given me. Something stirred, an impulse to actually do something meaningful for this village, for this era. I was raised under the harshest training. People like me weren't supposed to have emotions. In my past life, I could watch strangers die without blinking. But this world was different. Old Su had found me and raised me with kindness for 18 years. Then the Hoof family poured their love on me, without hesitation. Somewhere along the way, that frozen heart of mine had started growing flesh and blood again. I was learning how to love other people. Maybe that's why heaven gave me a second life. I slept more peacefully that night than I ever had before. The next morning, I overslept for the first time. Wang's knocking woke me. I splashed water on my face, grabbed my things, and we rushed to the bus station. We'd buy supplies at the county level, which was sufficient for the village's needs. Wang clutched his shirt over the money the entire bus ride, both arms wrapped around himself like armor. I told him repeatedly to relax. No pickpocket would dare try anything with me around. He couldn't hear me over his own anxiety, but I could tell he was happy underneath. At the county cooperative, I stepped back and let Wang handle the shopping. He agonized over every purchase, stretching 200 yuan across 300 people's winter needs. At first the money felt like a fortune, then impossibly small. He caught himself and shook his head. Just days ago, 5 yuan had seemed like a miracle. I told him not to hold anything back. Next month we'd sell more herbs and earn again. So he spent every last cent, experiencing for the first time in his life what it felt like to spend freely. Shania's jaw nearly hit the ground when he saw the mountain of supplies. Wang snapped at him to stop gawking and start loading. The donkey cart was packed so tightly that Wang and I could barely squeeze on, each perched on half a seat. But I noticed his smile never once faded as he looked at that full cart. Shania drove like the wind, eager to get home. We arrived while there was still light. A few children at the village entrance spotted us and sprinted back to tell everyone. The villagers had been at the clinic turning in herbs, but the moment they heard we were back, they dropped everything and ran for the entrance. Wang jumped off the donkey cart at the old tree, ready to announce the distribution over the loudspeaker. But a crowd was already stampeding toward us. He threw himself in front of them, yelling, "Stop running! You'll spook the donkey," terrified they'd damage the supplies. People crashed into each other trying to brake, several falling over. Shania was grinning behind him, quietly amused. He'd seen the mighty village chief trembling nervously in the city, so this sudden return to authority was entertaining. But he'd never say a word. Wang's son Qingshan couldn't contain himself, asking how much we'd earned. Wang scolded him, with that composure, "You think you can take over for me someday?" then turned to address the crowd. He stepped aside so everyone could see the cart piled high with supplies. Eyes went wide across the crowd. "We earned 200 yuan this trip. After bus tickets and lodging, 5 yuan, that leaves 195. Nobody could process it." Some thought he was lying. They asked if the bags were filled with rocks and weeds. I understood. They'd had too many dreams crushed before. They were terrified this was another one. Wang told them he'd already converted all the money into supplies at the county cooperative. He ordered everyone to line up by group, with team leaders collecting their share based on work points earned over the past month. That's when reality hit. This was real. People scrambled to queue up. The scorekeeper brought out the record book, and Wang began the careful work of dividing everything. He bought mostly rough rice, cheap and filling, with just enough meat for each family to taste something. Even so, careful rationing could stretch it through winter. 1 meal a day would get them there. The distribution went on past midnight. Nobody complained about being tired. Every face was glowing with happiness, more joy than the annual grain distribution ever brought, because they'd never gotten meat or this much food before. Wang watched, his villagers smiling, and finally let himself smile too. That weathered face that always looked angry was simply carrying the survival of 300 people on its shoulders. The whole village felt like it was celebrating New Year. Even I was swept up in the warmth. Walking home with my family, the road somehow felt easier. Our group was the smallest, but we'd earned strong work points, so our share was generous. Back at the cow shed, My father placed all the supplies in my hands. I was confused. What's this for? This is the first time since we arrived that we've earned our own share, he said steadily. Before, you were spending your own dowry to feed us. Now we can finally provide for you. Xing Yuan chimed in happily. He could finally keep his promise to take care of his little sister. Everyone was watching me with bright, eager eyes. I looked at the pile of supplies in my arms and laughed. The moonlight caught my face, and apparently the whole family stood there stunned for a moment. Every one of them was secretly thinking the same thing. My daughter is beautiful, my sister is beautiful, my granddaughter is beautiful. The next morning, I got up early to make a proper breakfast, their reward for working so hard. I made lean pork and vegetable congee with white rice, then whipped up egg pancakes with diced vegetables for extra substance, since my father and brothers burned through food fast. Xing Yuan was lured out of bed by the smell before he'd even put on his shoes. When he saw the fresh egg pancakes, he was practically drooling. "Want to try one, third brother?" I held up the plate. He couldn't resist. He grabbed one and shoved it straight into his mouth, then started hopping around, flapping his hands because it was scalding hot. "Spit it out. Quick," I told him. Xing Yuan refused to spit out the scalding pancake. Even with blisters forming in his mouth, he swallowed every bite. Then he looked at me with teary eyes and said, "Little sister, I finally feel alive again." I didn't understand at first. Was the heat damaging his brain? "You have no idea what Mom did to our taste buds while you were gone for 2 days, he said, dramatically wiping his eyes. I thought about my mother's catastrophic cooking and suddenly understood. 2 days of that would make anyone lose the will to live. My mother appeared just in time to hear him bad-mouthing her. She grabbed his ear and twisted. He yelped and begged for mercy. She said his ear was useless anyway and squeezed harder. The rest of us watched and smiled. Wenbao quietly appeared beside me and said, "Thank you." Just that. I grinned. "You're welcome." He'd been reflecting on everything the family had been through. The framing, the exile, Huolingxiu's betrayal, finding out their real sister had been swapped at birth. When I came back and immediately got dragged into their punishment, they'd all braced for the worst, vowing to protect me no matter what. But somehow, life here wasn't as terrible as they'd feared. If anything, the family had grown closer than they'd ever been in the capital. After breakfast, everyone headed to the clinic to start another day of herb gathering. But when we arrived, nearly the whole village had already left for the mountains. We were the last group. My mother was shocked. Old Zhao explained with a chuckle that yesterday's distribution had lit a fire under everyone. Now that people had actually held the rewards in their hands, nobody was going through the motions anymore. More herbs meant more supplies, and everyone wanted a better winter. My mother didn't need to hear more. She shoved a basket into Wenbao's arms and started pushing my brothers out the door. She'd promised they would earn enough to support me, and she meant it. I stayed behind with my mother and spent the morning processing herbs until my hands and back went numb. Around noon, I was about to head home to cook when Wang showed up. He told me that snow would start in about a month, and our current shelter couldn't survive real winter weather. He wanted to send a few young men to fix up our house in the next couple days. I was thrilled. I'd been planning to ask him, and here he was offering. I pushed my luck a little. Could he add one more room and a kitchen? With 8 of us, my father and 3 brothers were crammed into one space. Wang thought about it and agreed. For anyone else, he might have said no, but I was the village's benefactor. A small request like that was easy to grant. I told him I'd feed the workers. He accepted. Treating helpers to meals was standard practice. That afternoon, Wang brought 5 strong young men to our place. I'd asked my grandparents to stay home and greet them. Grandma served the egg pancakes I'd prepared. The young men stared at those golden pancakes with visible hunger, swallowing hard, but then they thought about what I'd done for the village and politely refused. Qingshan, Wang's son, spoke up first, saying they'd come voluntarily and didn't need anything. He'd been the first to step forward precisely because calling people away from herb gathering for construction work wasn't popular. As the chief's son, he led by example so others would follow. My grandmother gently insisted, "You need energy to work. These were made especially for you." If you don't eat them, they'll go to waste. Qingshan didn't know how to refuse that. He looked over at his father, silently asking for permission.